We have not. If you look back over the arc of our deployment history over the last few years, we haven't had a lot of American combat power in our own neighborhood. I think that's, I suspect that's probably going to change. We'll see what we're ordered to do, and of course we follow that guidance, but we're definitely spending some time there now.
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Sunday, December 7th, 2025. Now, I've said this many times over the years, but I think, and I look back and I tend to feel the same looking back around COVID-19 topics, plenty of other major discussions. I feel like this show today and some of the ones we've done on this topic will turn out to be some of the most important work that I shy away from saying that I've done, but that's what I feel right now. It feels like where this is going is almost inevitable in regard to, I don't mean that we can't stop it, but in regard to where, like, I guess I should put it like this, the way that the power structures in regard to technocracy as we see it are trying to attempt this, they're not going to pull back. And one part of this control grid structure that we've been discussing, which is self-evident. I mean, it's being openly discussed. It's just about putting the pieces together and seeing what it amounts to, regardless of what their narrative is. One of the pieces that I'm recognizing is more of a societal, structural governance transition. And we all feel this right now. I'll make a point about this as we go through after some of the opening discussions, but we're dealing with a massive transition right now. And we should ask whether that's being engineered, like entirely. Like we were just off doing our own thing and suddenly they're convincing us we want something different. That's not what I think is happening, but that's something we should consider, or more so middle ground or all the other side. But I guess what I'm feeling is that people in general, I'm focusing mostly on America today, on the US and how it's being affected within, but this is really a global conversation and how we are watching this transition of people, like globally, but again, from the US, just desperately wanting something different, calling for, like I've been highlighting, recognizing the two-party illusion. As much as that's still being something seen, it's there. Clearly, the Republican movement right now is grappling with being lied to. And it's a massive shift we're watching. And it's not just that it's only now happening. It's waterfall. It's very clearly snowballing and people are taking notice. Now, that's just one part of it, though. We're watching this the way I've been framing Trump's administration. It's an interesting dynamic of sort of offering you what we've always asked for with the plan of delivering something different. So they pre-organized something that would be delivered that would feel the same, but would ultimately achieve their end, not ours. Not freedom and liberty, but control. But, the Fed, we're going to end the Fed with the CBDC or, that kind of an overlap. One of those that I'm seeing, and I've talked a lot about Prospera, or excuse me, I guess they pronounce it Prospera, but it's, it's the same point. Peter Thiel, the conversation of freedom cities, smart cities, it's all the same conversation. Now I've proven that. I'll go through the things I've said before, the sources we've used, the shows we've covered this on. It's a provable reality. And before I knew that, I was theorizing about how that connected. And it was kind of terrifying to see this weird libertarian, they call it, but it's really just a technocratic kind of hellscape in my mind, as I've covered very clearly. But ultimately that they see this as something that's about freedom and liberty, or they're framing it that way. And it was something that I saw as a terrible thing. And then I heard this conversation of new freedom cities and new things and Homestead Acts and things happening in this country. And I said, oh man, I really hope that's not what this is. And I continued to dive into it. And then eventually it became clear that the funding was exactly the same. And it turns out they're even referencing Prospera and these different network state charter city overlap discussions in regard to the freedom cities, exactly how they're modeling it. And then even more so finding out that the funding and Perdomo's capital and the different people involved are the same people. So you could argue those are two separate things, but we have to realize that that's what we'll show you today, whether Greenland or anything else. These are not organic decisions for the interest of America or for what he thinks will benefit the country financially or any of that. Maybe there's an overlap financially, but it will not be for Americans or the individual peoples of the countries. This was something Peter Thiel wanted and what the movement wanted for a potential network state that appears to have floundered. But we're going to go through how important all of this is and how it connects to a very important article that was written by Financial Times. And I just have to point out to start that this is exactly what we've been talking about in regard to the independent media and the work you're all doing out there, supporting, doing your own work, shows, just being out talking to people. We are setting the conversation. We, as the actually independent media, not the mainstream alternative pretenders, but and I'm not saying people that I agree with only. There's plenty of genuinely independent people that I disagree with, but the mainstream alternative media they're the mainstream, guys. But the independent media are out here setting the conversation and having discussing things like this. Not just me, a lot of us, and things that they desperately try to keep off the table and are forced to cover. Or you could look at it differently, and that's how I tend to see the way most of the media works today. But Financial Times has done great work in the past. I don't trust any of them, and I question all the mainstream. But this is an example of possibly them just seeing an opening and doing good journalism. That does happen sometimes. And importantly, to highlight that this is something that is now in the center of the conversation, which is not just the potential, the difference between the two ideas, but the potential of going all the way to techno-feudalism, techno-fascism, colonialism, and really what's going on inside these locations, and not just the window dressing, airbrushed version they sell you, even from the articles pretending to criticize it. Overlapping this with the longevity movement and the CDC and that weird technocratic gene therapy bio overlap. And this is all part of the same conversation. COVID-19, the Great Reset. This is all, as I see it, part of this massive transition. And you could look at it like that might have been the sell for the Democrats. This is the sell for the Republicans. I don't know if I look at it that way. Either way, this is clear. I'm going to start with a point about Israel that I want to connect with it because there's I've seen this before by many of them, by the way, but this is a prominent example in the recent article we're covering where one of the individuals refers this to this entire thing. The network state, Prospera, all of them we're going to go through, which will blow your mind today, as tech Zionism. And it's crazy how this continues to happen. Now, you could argue he's just utilizing the term as the way he views it, but you're going to find out the more you look through this that many of these people are religious Zionists and diehard Israel supporters, not Jewish necessarily, but specifically ardent Zionist supporters. And how important that is to this larger agenda. Now, he uses it as an argument of sort of like this new, I guess, sort of religious connotation place for tech bros to be, but it definitely, they see themselves as some sort of prophets in a lot of this. It's just a really terrifying overlap. Now, back to the original point, the idea that I see in this is that this is them trying to transition everybody into the new style of whatever they see this as, just society. And I think this is something that Matt Ayer's written about before. We've discussed more than once the long-term transition, but how you view this from the feudal state, the time frame, into where we somehow had the ability to vote and as individuals take part in the process of governance. Now, many people argue that's been an illusion, possibly the entire time. You can decide for yourself, but at the time, you can see that there was almost a planned transition. And here we're beginning to see the hallmarks of that again, where the techno-fascist type people who probably have always been behind the scenes using financial and other means to control outcomes, Zionism, globalism, are now putting their faces back in front. Or you could argue they're just taking control. I tend to argue there's always been a level of that. But either way you look at it, we are watching this transition, a coup, if you will, and it is not something that Americans are involved in deciding. And that's not America first, clearly. But also when you consider the other influences, and I don't think it's just Israel, but that's a huge driving factor and obviously the most belligerent part of it. But just absolutely willing to burn down anything, anywhere, at any time because they don't get what they want or because they want you to be punished for not doing the right thing. And this is driving a huge part of this conversation in this country. So leave it there to start, but we're going to talk about Israel in some parts to open this up to make sure you see just very quickly, but because of the overlap, I want you to see some of these points and overlap that with some points that I just want to highlight about the, I guess, inner circle, Elon Trump kind of discussion, some brief points, and is relevant to the larger conversation because it's what they're trying to do right now while this is happening, as well as just the dishonesty around it and some points I think are very relevant within it. And we'll get to some things around that, but then I'm generally just discussing the recent article, Prospera, the many different network state transitions taking place and overlapping that alarmingly with Venezuela and what's going on in this country. Open with a clip talking about troops being active within the country, which we all know is already happening. Just certain people pretend like it's a different thing because narrative, but literally telling you, and it seems almost as if the guy at the clip in the beginning is uncomfortable about it, but hey, I follow orders, so this is where it's going. Now, is that because they're going to, martial law style change into what they want to change into? Or is it something more benign? Or are they not really seeing that far ahead? It's important to consider all these things and recognize how that is happening alongside all of this. And maybe let's just say Trump is not doing that because of it, but somebody else could seize that control and use it for their purposes. However you look at it, guys, we are dealing with some pretty uncertain times. So let's start with Israel. Talking of uncertain times and what the Gazan people are still dealing with, just to understand the kind of tech Zionism. So as these people are saying, we want tech Zionism, right? So that's Zionism, what they're doing. We want tech Zionism over here. Well, let's talk about what Zionism is doing. And this is just a few points, but we've covered this extensively since it started, and it's kind of sad. I guess sad's the wrong word, but the idea that this can still be continuing regardless of literally literally to the fullest meaning of that word, every part of this story broken down. They're lying about everything they're doing, and everyone seems to know that in the international community, every human rights group, and the politicians just keep pushing back. What does that show you, if not the fact that these people aren't working on your behalf? So Tamir Nahad just simply points out something that is not getting a lot of attention, and there's pictures you will find that will break your heart. And this is not the first year they've dealt with this, guys. He says, what is not shown in the media and not shared anywhere is what we are living through right now. The tents have turned into open refrigerators in the freezing cold. The wind enters through every torn corner, and you can hear children coughing everywhere. Now, regardless of whether you even think this person is just, editorializing and just saying what they think, this is happening. There's so much evidence to it. It's painful. How many, people on the ground documenting, journalists, local and foreign, on top of the fact that you have human rights groups highlighting this stuff. You've got any number of, you can prove this. And the pictures you can see from these flimsy tents in the middle of winter, it's insane. This is not just called exactly what it is by literally everybody. Coughing everywhere. And the illness is quite documented as well. The children are shivering in thin, worn out summer clothes. Even the blankets are soaked and barely usable, not even fit for autumn, let alone winter. The ground beneath them is wet sand, no insulation, no bedding, just cold, hunger, and fear. This is not a life. What we are going through here is a cruel test of humanity. Now, even on top of that, add the fact that they just dumped in some cell phones that seem to be blowing up people's hands. Barely any conversation about that outside of very particular independent media. Very important to understand how that relates to the idea of, you all have a piece of Israel in your pocket, the idea of the pager attack and what they're doing and floating the idea that they have that in everybody's country in the world. It's almost too hard to miss. It's almost impossible to miss. On top of that, the very implication that what you get from them might be somehow sabotage probably leads for them to not want anything from them. But this is why, on top of everything else, not even being able to find it, that they suffer when having to deal with what they're given, worrying that it could be poisoned and sacked, which is not a joke, by the way. That's already been shown to have happened, whether it's I could go off on this forever, but things that go bad or sabotaged. This is what's still happening. On top of that, here's what Netanyahu wants you to know. Guess what, guys? Not done. Despite all the claims, despite the fact that Israel has broken the ceasefire hundreds of times, repeatedly, every day, and still pretend like it's their fault, something's happening, that it's not over. Why? Because phase 3 is still coming. Like everybody knew who wasn't blindly lying to you, this was never going to stop. Even once they get everything they want, the point is, we have to de-radicalize the people who are left, even if Hamas is gone. Just like we told you they planned, because it's not about Hamas, the Hamas that they fund. It is about Palestinians. Here's what he had to say.
The third phase, and that is to de-radicalize Gaza. Something that also people believed was impossible, but it was done in Germany, it was done in Japan, it's done in the Gulf states, it can be done in Gaza too, but of course Hamas has to be dismantled.
Right. Yeah, but let's not forget, though, by the way, that's the same Hamas that they need to make a deal with before they can remove them and kill them all, because that all adds up in anybody's logical mind, right? This is insane. And what they're doing is simply extending this out, and Trump and the rest of them are continuing to do exactly what all of them have done. Support this blindly, no matter what. It's painful. What he is simply highlighting for you is that they will find another reason to get rid of every single one of them, to kill every one of them. And if you're talking about de-radicalization, isn't that what they all criticized about Uyghurs in China? You know, the history around Japan and all the rest of these are not nice stories, guys. It's incredible to me how they frame other genocide, for example, and say, but, you know, what about Iraq? It's the same point that Alfonso made the other day. When your only response is, what about the other genocides? You're not doing too well. But just want you to see, this is not going away. And this is about, think about the idea here, you know, that they can just seize this, do what they've done for 100 years plus, and can now just claim they need to de-radicalize them. They're the bad ones. Their ideology is a problem, not the ones committing genocide, mind you. And Mel points out something that you should all know, and she's doing good work. 100% correct. This is Tucker Carlson, who's, by the way, getting attacks from congressmen about the fact that he's having a conversation with somebody from Qatar, despite the fact that Israel's the one that uses Qatar and funds them through Hamas. You know, it's painful that they know that, but pretend it's not happening. He's speaking with him about Hamas's relationship, and Qatar's prime minister says that Hamas's relationship with Israel started over 13 years ago, or rather Qatar, but this is the same conversation. And she says it's 100% correct. The leadership of Hamas has been hosted in Syria prior to 2012. In 2011, the U.S. and Israel, capitalizing on sectarian divisions in the Syrian civil war, asked Qatar to host Hamas instead, in hopes of weakening support for Assad. This goes back, see, if you pay attention from one point forward, you'll never get the full picture. And that's what they love for people, to step into a situation and act like, you know, looking forward, there's nothing new. And it says Qatar wanting to improve its image in the West. Great. All of the money sent to Hamas by Qatar has been directly approved and largely facilitated by Israel. It's easy to look up, guys. So just understand, as I said, anyone worth your time has been telling you this for years. Follow her work. I made the same point about something recently. There's a lot of these kind of things, and it's finally, these things are becoming common talking points, but recognize who has been breaking it down, not casually, but hard, you know, continually pointing to it, giving you source material, and then recognize the people who used to point to certain things, you know, broadly and act like they're trying, and then now they're nowhere to be seen when these things are really starting to break down. On top of that, Mike Huckabee, you know, America First, Mike Huckabee, blind religious Zionist, this is Shadow of Ezra too, the account posting it. Huckabee commands a hand-picked group of 1,000 Christian Zionist pastors in Israel to prepare for an information war in America focused on spreading the truth about Israel. That sounds like that's what America First would do. Hey, Israeli Zionist pack, let's go dump information in America about what you think about Israel. America First. And it says, he says each pastor has a duty to make Americans understand that modern-day Israel is the same Israel described in the Bible, because that's not the dumbest thing to say in the room. Right? You mean the largely think about what we're talking about here. Even if you take that literally, which nobody does, guys, people who literally take the Bible as literal are the people that you should be concerned about, or any religious text. These things, first of all, regardless of your faith, for how long ago they've been rewritten and reused by kings, by councils of Nicaea. I mean, this is a long time this has been happening. Continuing to edit and alter and change. But, you know, you could argue it's all guided by God's hand, but we don't know is the point. And at the end of the day, to say that you know the name Israel in the Bible is the country that the British gave the Zionist allowance to take from the Balfour Declaration is just stupid, guys. I don't even know whether he doesn't know that or whether he's just dishonest. It's hard to tell, probably both. But he says Huckabee adds that the land of Israel was given to the Jewish people. Yeah, by British to Zionists who hated Jewish people, apparently. It's just the dumbest thing, guys. This is where we are. These are the people who are going to save us. These are the people who are ushering in the end of what we're doing right now. Time to stand up for it, guys. If you want anything we pretend we have right now, it's time to stand up and fight against people like this, and I'm not calling for violence. Here is Francisco Albanese adding one more point to this opening segment, showing you what they're doing to people who are actually standing up. And this really needs to overlap this with all the things we've been saying around censorship and control, the control grid itself. She is being debanked. She is being censored and cut off from credit cards and insurance. And no one's talking about it. Why? Because Israel, because U.S. sanctions. None of this is legal. And she's a UN rapporteur. It's just over the top. This is where the world is going. Where's all the Elon Musks and everyone else who was up in arms about debanking over the trucker convoy? Yeah, they don't care when it has to do with something they disagree with, which means they're hypocrites. See, I have principles, so I would go, that's wrong, even what they're doing. Like if they got debanked for supporting something I disagree with, I would still say, well, they're debanked and that shouldn't happen because that's illegal, unconstitutional. So here's what she had to say. Just realize this is the world they're building.
Insurance.
Oh, and I'll add one last thing when we get to the overlap. This is the kind of thing that happens in a technocratic city, right? Where you can be turned off, just like the Great Reset overlaps. You own nothing and be happy. That's what they're building. And what's crazy, when you look like the Gaza city, also backed by the same people, CBDCs, tokenized everything, smart cities, the whole thing is exactly what they all fight. And yet the very people immediately around Teal, Andreessen and Teal and all the people in the inner circle are literally outlining a smart city when they roll out the Freedom City dynamic. And we go, yay, because it's got a Trump sign on it. It's kind of sad. And this is the kind of thing that happens in a world like that.
Refused to reimburse me. I have a private medical insurance, and they refused to reimburse me because I'm sanctioned by the US. The European Union Parliament invited me for a talk recently. They booked a room for me, and it was canceled because it was on my name.
Wow,
Even financial transactions that have nothing to do with me, but have my name on it. For example, you try to transfer £1 or $1 or €1 to your friends with my name in it.
Wow.
It won't pass.
I'm so sorry, firstly, that you're having to deal with this. And it shows how crippling these sanctions can be. And yet the US is threatening to ramp up its sanctions, not just to impact individuals associated with the ICC, but the ICC as a whole. If they are to go ahead with that, what would that mean for global justice?
It would. I think it would be a fatal blow for the International Criminal Court.
It's just kind of crazy, right? What it shows you is a blanket, right? Not just her, anybody. Things with her name attached to it, people she's attached to, like that's it. That's belligerent. That's what we're dealing with. So, on that note, a couple opening points around the current status quo. And it was important to think about this, guys. The Elon Musk has pulled himself away a bit, but he's still part of the larger agenda. Right now, with all this happening, whether it's the genocide or the transition they don't want you to look at, it's just clear to me that what they're doing is trying to distract, flood the zone, like we heard. And if you think that's just a partisan thing, we need to start thinking bigger. It's distraction, so we end up in a place we can't come back from. And what we're seeing is people out there trying to act like I've been saying from the beginning, Elon Musk like a Pied Piper to technocracy, right? Here he is pretending to be about free speech like everything else. And we'll go over some other points that I want you to see that are just distractionary. So he comes out and says, everyone caved but us. And it says where free speech still lives. X, apparently. Okay, and here's an article that I've covered. Under Elon Musk, Twitter has approved 83% of censorship requests by authoritarian governments. It's very easy to prove. Or the fact that even under the GARM thing, he was along with that. This was right in the beginning. It was clear he was complying with censorship. And this person responds, showing you exactly that same point where he's being sent things he can't even see in other places of the world. Now, you can argue that he has to, so the platform can stay up, but then be honest about it. Be like, well, we censor as little as we can, but we do. Because that will be honest. You see, you don't pretend like you're not censoring when you're literally censoring. Or aside from things like this, government cease and desist orders, he has personally been caught censoring around South Africa, Venezuela, you name it, in very, very clumsy ways that even Grok calls out. And we all just pretend like it's not happening. La, la, we don't want to see it. Act like it's not there. It's what they're doing. It's sad. And this was, I think it was Halal Flow that actually posted that. I forgot to grab that, but I want to give him a shout out for, they were the one that put that image up and I grabbed it from him. Now he comes again on the 5th and says, freedom of speech is the bedrock of democracy. The only way to know who you're voting or what you're voting for. Just the fact that they just this is flooding the zone. Nobody believes this, guys. The idea that you really think, where was it? There was just somebody's comment I was going to laugh at. Anyway, there's people making fun of him, right? Because he's been caught censoring many, many times. And the simple point is just to highlight the fact that this is just about, one, framing yourself as somehow the hero of everything while you're literally ushering in the wrong thing and acting like you're somehow saving everything so people go back to bed. Or just angry and yell about it instead of noticing the larger point. So here's another example of this, which very much overlaps with the kind of deflecting from the genocide, the idea of kind of a normalization of a few different things. This is interesting to me. I saw this today. Daily Romania post this random screenshot. Who knows where it's from? It doesn't look like Grok. It's some random response thing. So for all we know, it's some input-output thing you did on his computer. Who knows? Now, I'm not disputing the information. I just think it's interesting that that's shared and he shares it. Why? Because it supports his narrative. It says at least 400,000 children, women, and men have been killed or raped by non-European migrants or refugees, in quotes. I don't know why it's in quotes, since 2010. It's a genocide of ethnic Europeans sponsored by EU and those who support it. That's quite a stretch in a lot of ways, but there's many points that are valid to take from that in regard to what is being weaponized. But it says, this is what I mean when I say the EU is anti-European. Okay. Elon Musk says, when does it become a genocide? It's just a gross comment from somebody who's literally denying a genocide the largest and most obvious and live stream we've ever seen in our lives. This person says, in a word, is Elon spreading misinformation? Now I'm going to go through the information in a second. Or you know what? Why don't we just look at it last? So I asked it. I asked Grok. I wanted to see what this would say and then see a couple of variations. So I said, how many children, women, and men were raped or killed by non-European migrants since 2010? Estimate number only. It's exactly what they asked. And that said 400,000, by the way, on the first response. So it says children, 229,000, women, 301,000, men, 108,000. So it's more, in fact, by Grok's estimate. Okay. So the first thing that stood out to me was, okay, well, killed by non-European migrants, that says, so that means anywhere. The way you were asking that question, that would mean like literally anywhere. But even that's not even, if you asked it more specifically, it's still pretty much the same number. I just want to be clear that AI can be easily manipulated that way. But then asking the other question, right? Well, okay, if we're going to be objective about this and not just be like Elon and share a screenshot that backs up what he wants you to think, you can go, okay, well, wait a minute. What's the alternative? If we're saying that this many have been raped by non-European, well, how many have been raped by Europeans in Europe? Wouldn't that be important to think about the contrast? Okay, what if it's 10 billion and there's only 1 million here? Wouldn't that be like, well, then they're doing better than the Europeans? Like, it's a gross thought, but the point is to be objective about the information and not just blindly let what he wants you to think lead you into what he's trying to create for you, or any of these partisans doing the same thing. Okay, how many children, women, and men were raped or killed by Europeans since 2010 estimate? And I did the same thing, by the way, saying in Europe to make it's the same information. And it says 1 million to 2 million total, 1 million and 1.2 million total. And it says annual rape offenses rose from 50 to 60,000 in early 2010s to 91,000 in 2023, 90% victims female. Now, to be clear, this is Europeans, not immigrants. These are people that are in Europe who are European. And so that means that 90% of those victims are female in regard to that time frame, and it's over 1.2 million. So that's terrifying, but I would argue it's somewhat the same, and it varies place to place. Horrifying reality that cops should do something about, overlapping with the thing like California and plenty of other states in this country who have just walls of rape kits they've never even opened because they're focusing on cannabis law reform and other things like that, or cannabis attacks. Just understand that they don't really care about these crimes, and if you understand that in most of these places, it'll horrify you. But realizing if we're talking about the overlap, well, then is it I guess distorted or intentionally deceptive to share that number without the other number? Because what that would ultimately mean, what I'm getting at, is that this is something that happens in society. Yes, it's horrible. And yes, we should call it out. And yes, people should go to jail for that. But the numbers comparatively make it seem like that's just what happens in a society. And you're picking out the ones that happen there versus the ones that happen here. And it's only bad when the ones that we don't like do it, or at least worth pointing out. I just find that so interesting. Don't you? I mean, this intent. Now, look, there are very clear crimes that are being committed by immigrants that need to be called out, that in many cases are being ignored for political reasons. And that's ridiculous. As anybody who pretends I don't talk about these things, I have many times. What I'm trying to highlight, though, is that these are people trying to over-focus on the one thing they want you to see, and in many cases using things that aren't true. Worth thinking about. And this overlaps with this larger conversation. So this is simply saying how many children, men, and women are raped or killed by Europeans in Europe, and it's the same 3.4 million reported. That's more, but it's just, the point is that we're talking about a higher number is the ultimate point. So when this person asks Grok and says, Grok, in a word, is he spreading misinformation? It says the 400,000 figure cited in the quoted post lacks support from official EU or national statistics. Shocking. Now, of course, you could argue they're trying to hide it. Well, yeah, I would agree with that too. But assuming that because you want to believe the number is just as stupid as posting a screenshot. Look it up and you'll find out that that in general, it's the point I'm making. But it says, with studies showing no evidence of such a scale, and okay, so misinformation. He goes, so the answer is yes, Grok. Elon is using his platform to spread misinformation. And he says, the 400,000 figure remains substantiated by official. It's just like the same repeated sort of slightly changed response. And he goes, okay, Grok. So the 400,000 is based on absolutely zero evidence from any verifiable source. In essence, it's made up. But you still refuse to confirm that amplifying it to millions of people is spreading misinformation. So if I had said Elon has eaten 400,000 people, would that be something awaiting verification or would it be misinformation? And he said, the 400,000 claim lacks evidence from official sources. Like it's almost like, and I think this is what people pick up on, there's a thing happening here where there's some kind of an algorithmic thing going, you don't say Elon's doing the X, Y, and Z. And so just revert back to the response. My opinion. This person chimes in, Grok is it's okay, Grok. You can admit that your creator is lying on his truth platform. Don't have to try to navigate around it. Remember the free speech guy we were just talking about? And it says, based on my review of EU crime data from sources like Eurostat and the total homicide, just the same kind of thing. And it says, just saying Elon Musk is lying. It's not hard. Misrepresenting and making up data is lying. Based on the official sources data. I was laughing as I was going through this. And it says, are you capable of saying Elon Musk is lying? Let's see if it responded. It says, no, I'm not incapable. However, lying implies deliberate intent, which I can't confirm. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Well, let's see how often, if you want to go through and look at how often they called things misinformation, Grok included, because it counters what Elon set the tally at in regard to what he gives the information for. It's just funny to me. That is how they're misleading people around immigration and a number of things. And Grok is lying right on top of it. But on top of that, let's overlap that with the Christmas conversation and lies happening around Israel. So we have this major push happening around every year. Palestinians hate Christians and there's no such thing. And it's just not true. It's actually very clearly the reverse. But it's becoming an interesting conversation this year because nobody's buying the Israel lies anymore. So again, he writes again, Tommy Robinson, of course, says 10 dead in a car is driven into a Christmas market. Preparation for crowds in France is, basically just saying another attack on Christmas, right? And Elon goes again. Except for the fact that they lied and nobody died and they ultimately made this into something it's not, which even Twitter breaks that down. And so Richard rightly calls it out and says American media won't cover a drunk driving accident in France. How disgraceful. Because essentially that's what it ultimately was. Somebody who turns out was not even the information is still coming out, but what's shown, it doesn't seem to be anything they want to frame it as. Somebody drunk and drives into what it turns out to be not even it's a Christmas light switch on thing. And it wasn't even some major Christmas market. It's just lie upon lie, and Robinson's doing that on purpose. And Elon Musk he promotes exactly what he wants to, regardless of whether it's fake, and never ever comes back. So in reality, Omar points out this is a Palestinian city, not Israel, where Palestinian Christians are celebrating Christmas. Here is Eli Jacoby, just like every one of them. It's crazy what they're doing, who says Christmas in Israel. The only country in the Middle East that you will see this. Guys, that's not Israel. I mean, you can ask Grok, you can do whatever you want. A Palestinian city. There are similar displays in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, but guess what? Not in Israel proper. There are really no words to describe what a disgusting lying propagandist this guy is. That's what he said. Here is Elon Levy doing the exact same thing. Guys, you can even see the guy wearing a Palestinian garb. Look at that. Okay, and Elon Levy comes and says, this is how Israel does Christmas. Like, do you not realize how shockingly desperate that is? Get ready for tech Zionism because it's coming. And then Laura says, this is how Palestinians do Christmas. This is how Israel does Christmas. Israel hits Bethlehem in Christmas raids on occupied West Bank, destroying an entire church with the Christmas tree left. Christmas in Gaza, no respite for Christians tapped in churches by Israel's war, 2023. Sheltered in churches, Gaza's Christians face another Christmas under fire. And they always claim they've canceled it when they're ultimately genociding them for years and they're not even able to. It's kind of insane, isn't it? As this person writes, Israel's propaganda. Christians are oppressed in Palestine. Well, Bethlehem's reality, Muslims and Christians lighting the Christmas tree side by side, which happens every year. I mean, the insane, what's the right word for it? Confluent, when these things meeting each other. When you're watching the reality of this finally being given the right light and people finally with the right influence seeing it, contrasted with Elon Levy going, look at us in Israel. And then you're going, are you serious? That is Palestine. The only way you can take that is desperate. They're losing. They don't know what to do. They know we're looking, and they're just trying to keep people, more than anything, the Christian right. Talk about Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, guys. It's all relevant. So let's just quickly point this out as well. In the beginning of the genocide, 2023, I guess, rather, 3/4 of the way through the 78-year genocide. The point is, post October 7th, this Israeli politician went on LBC and was lying and saying there's no churches, there's no Christians, and got repeatedly fact-checked. And finally, she just dismisses it, moves on. They have always been lying to you. You guys likely already know that, but for those new, they lie, they lie, they lie. Oh, I guess I forgot to grab that. And this clip is it's just crazy to me. You know how you can be such a brazen liar. And the only way that makes sense is that that the media, at least before it was the case, would lie for you. And it wouldn't dogpile. You would just get to move on and it wouldn't really become a thing. Not anymore.
If a ceasefire means the return of the hostages and the dismantlement of a genocidal regime that has stated that they're going to attack us again.
Think about that statement now. A genocidal regime, Hamas, the one that Israel was funding. Just they're drowning in their lies.
Then everybody would be in favor of a ceasefire. But if a ceasefire means that we're just going to keep them quiet for a bit until they attack again, then it's Israel's obligation to defend its citizens and destroy that threat, don't you think?
Why is it necessary, is reported, to start shooting, having snipers outside a church?
Yep.
I saw the reports this morning.
Okay, so first the point was a sniper, right? So instead of going, we're not sniping children at church, there are no churches, is the effort she goes in. And I think that's kind of why she fell in that trap, because the effort was to not talk about sniping children.
The church, there are no churches in Gaza, so I'm not quite sure where the report is talking about.
There's a Catholic church in there, isn't there? That is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are no Christians because.
Oh, that's fun. Okay, wait, so there's no churches. Oh, but there are. Oh, yeah, but there's no Christians. Like 5 seconds go by. This is always what I'm trying to highlight about Israel propaganda. It's just lazy, belligerent. Well, how about that one? No. Okay, then what about these three at the same time then? That worked for you? And only lying, dishonest people use it or fall for it.
They were driven out. There's
a Catholic church in there, isn't there? That is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are no Christians because they were driven out by.
Well, respectfully, there are Christians because I spoke to an MP yesterday who has family members in the church who are Christians.
Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know who was attacked. I didn't see the report.
Oh, jeez, guys, this is one of the best examples of how obvious this is. Now, the reason this is important, guys, for the conversation today is because this is now all the people we're going to talk about literally all of them. Thiel, Andreessen, and all the rest we're going to get into today that I might not have mentioned in the past are very clear Zionists and proudly so. Palantir, clearly, Karp and Thiel. And so these are the kind of people that they're aligned with, supported with. They went there early and gave them the power to be able to kill them. Lavender and Habsora. These were the AI programs killing all the Palestinians. I'll grab that since might have been a while since we've mentioned that. Oh, it was 972. There it is. The AI machine directing Israel's bombing spree. Now, with what we know is happening, the genocide and the indiscriminate killing that we can all document now, that's what Palantir is involved in with and allowing. And they're working with the United States, the same surveillance dynamic. They're also working to build the new future of the way the world works. Great. Good people. So before we get into the meat of today, here's what Trump is doing, right? So instead of focusing on all the things that even Republicans want, and some of them do seem to still want to talk about the election, even though, the stolen election, even though he seems to not be interested in arresting anybody, which... But yeah, it was stolen and they're all crooks. Yay, MAGA. But nobody goes to jail. Freedom. Owen Schroer calls it out. So this is Spencer saying Trump is complaining about 2020 election being rigged during the 2025 Christmas tree lighting ceremony. Good. And Owen says it's quite strange. The people in charge of arresting criminals that steal elections keep talking about stolen elections without arresting anyone. It's over, guys. You either can choose to acknowledge it or you can continue in the direction of the sorter, Benny Johnson, Alex Jones, and can just continue to look more stupid by the day. On top of that, even people like Dan Bongino are blocking major supporters. Here's the Hodge twins, you know, who they have been calling certain things out, but they were clearly supporters of Trump. And now that they start calling things out, Dan Bongino blocks them. He blocked me too, by the way. But it says, stop following us. Don't go into the government if you can't take the heat. Exactly. They're just out of their depth. And the the patriotic blonde was also blocked by him. But this is, and she's pretty prominent, you know, 107,000 followers. But just this is where they are. Like their own people are starting to go, but what about that? Blocked. So they're desperate, guys. And here's Elon Musk. He shares Gunther Eagleman, who says true to a random meme that says Ilhan Omar wasn't even elected by Americans. She was elected by 80,000 Somalis that Obama dropped in Minnesota. Right, which represents about 1% of the entire Minnesota voting base. But these people are smart, guys. Trust their information that's on a blue meme they threw out there. And it says, far left imported voters to gain power, and it worked. Okay. Well, first of all, the idea that this happened in some, you know, is it possible Obama decided to bring them in and then did it so she would get elected? You know, of course it's possible. But if the idea that we think that with all we know about the government and the two-party illusion and how this operates, guys, they're all fighting for the same things. They're all supporting the same larger agendas. So this matters if you can prove it. But like always, there's no real evidence to back it up other than Somalia, and they're bad, they're brown and bad, and Somalia is bad because Trump says, and they're there, so therefore we know that because Obama. I mean, I'm not even making it up, guys. That's really the breadth of most people are just repeating this and sharing it like this with nothing to back it up. And he just goes, true. And again, Elon says the far left imported voters to gain power. Well, probably. Okay, let's just even pretend that's the case. I don't deny that it's possible, but the idea that you think that that's the idea of importing immigrants that translates Democrat only, I've made points about that my whole time doing this. It's just not the truth. It is a very clear, I mean, even Trump was talking about the Hispanic vote for him. They just use that to highlight the narrative for people that are blind in the partisan direction. But I said, great, okay, well, that's the case. Okay. Now that it's exposed, Elon Musk, how long until they're all arrested by the most transparent admin in history that's fighting the deep state, right? When will that happen, Musk? Oh, never? Cool. Looking forward to the next hollow meme. That's where we are. Like, this is the same thing as Trump doing that. And only people like Gunther Eagleman and Elon and these kind of blind supporters are still there, lapping it all up. And of course, Propaganda & Co. adds to that about Elon Musk saying that he imported power and says the South African billionaire mass importing Indian labor to replace white Americans. Or Trump saying that we need to import people for the new direction they're going in because we don't have the talent here. Yeah, that's going on, guys. But don't listen to all the blind people out there, or rather listen to the blind followers out there because they're the smart ones, clearly. Okay, so the crux of this point today, guys, what I was saying in the beginning. And I do feel it's relevant, you know, the idea of what that generally is and setting in your mind and who they support and what they're doing there. These are the people that are literally in a back room. I shouldn't even say it like that. It's, you know, the idea of like the back room and just, but the way I see it is they discuss these things. And you can see that, you know, they have meetings, they have these discussions around, you know, whether it's Silicon Valley kind of things or the idea of the network state kind of society that they're building. It's very public. We'll read through it. So the idea is that, you know, it's clear that they share an ideology. And if they're all very clearly supporting Zionism and what they're doing, that does not speak well for world they want to build, for, you know, whatever they want to frame it as. The idea that it'll be, you know, safe and happy, you know, whatever. It's just, I can't even think of the words they use. At the end of the day, those people will support what benefits them at the expense of the people that do not support them. That's what they've shown you their entire lives. So the thought that I wrote down earlier, right, is ultimately that as a near universal call for change that can no longer be suppressed. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. It's just rising up everywhere, right? People in every party, people are like, you know, corruption, nonstop wars, to the point to where they're running on those kind of points and then just going back to normal, left and right. So the universal call for change that is really can't be suppressed. And as that's happening, we enter what I kind of framed as the bait and switch era, right? Well, that's what I was saying with Trump and all the different things they're doing that are offering what we've always wanted, but only because they have something worse in the wings. And that wherein the powers that shouldn't be during that bait and switch era, offer us what we've always wanted, as I said, yet it, only in the purpose of ordering, it basically to develop or deliver the next trap in the guise of sort of how we saw what we wanted. Basically saying that they're setting that up as how we want to see it and knowing that it will ultimately lead us in the wrong path. And I said, we are tired of the ruling order, the status quo, a society in which the rich do what they want. So they come out and they offer us radical change, right? They hear our complaints. They know what we're angry about. They're not going to change. They're going to find a way to make what they're doing what we think we want, right? So radical change because we're calling for change. And so you'll get I'm a libertarian and I want a new society that's going to be just like you want, except that's not all what they're building. They just like Trump has done both times. You tap in to what you see, the undercurrent, which should be the top of the conversation, but it's the undercurrent because the mainstream doesn't allow everyone to really focus on it. But it's what people want. We want a new thing. We want change. We want government that actually cares or no government at all. So radical change is what they're offering under the guise of radical change, offering more control. And it'll Pied Piper us right into the new control structure. Now, as I thought of this earlier, as I should have mentioned in some of the other shows, that to be clear about this, it's not about not being able to do this, right? Because you could make a valid point about freedom, liberty, having the ability to go and buy an island if you have the money and start your own society. It's exactly what I want to do, and Derek, and the same idea, right? But not in the sense of some kind of, that's the overlap, right? So the idea of being able to build something new and be able, as if the governments would let you, but unless you're a part of them, breaking off and doing your own thing, they'll never allow that. But of course, I think that should be allowed. So it's not about being allowed to do that. That's not what I'm criticizing here. What I'm criticizing is it being done through government, often with our tax dollars, or ultimately being used, if that's not the case, to supplant U.S. interests and rights. That's what I'm highlighting. And so if you look at these things, or in the sense of Honduras, for example, supplanting Honduran rights and Honduran sovereignty and Honduran interests that are clear that they don't support. And so whether it's about, so like if they had an independent area they could go seize on that nobody was there, well, then that's a different story. But see, this is where we are in the world today, where that's why it's tech Zionism. They're talking about seizing, and that's the argument they make, a piece of territory that belongs to somebody else and turning it into the new tech Zionism hotspot, around like the more of a religious connotation to it, like a new fulfilling the prophecy of the tech Zionism. It is unnerving to me. And so it's clear, it's important to make that point about how it's being done under the guise of what we want. And it's the same idea. So they'll make it about freedom and liberty and self-determination, all the things they denied everybody else, but it isn't really about that when you see what it's doing and how it's being laid out. So let's start with a point that I thought was very interesting on this segment. This made me laugh, but it's actually a really good point. And I'm going to bring it up again in probably other AI tech overlaps. But so this person posted this image, and if you guys probably don't even, some of the younger generation probably doesn't know what that is. Oh, isn't that the save button on my computer? It's a floppy disk. And so this old container was what you if you had them, you could store, think of floppy disk like a file on your computer. And it stored data, information, and secret and financial information. And it had a lock on it, and it sat in a safe or in your office or whatever. And it says IT security in 1990s. It's actually a very valid point, right? Because yes, it was much more difficult to be able to, relay things. And there was tons of more difficulty, but guess what? It was shockingly more secure, despite what all they claim today. Because as it says, Clark writes, laugh all you want, but the information in those floppies can't be hacked from half a world away. Now, the main point I'm trying to make, the abstract point, is that right now we're being offered what is being presented as better, freer, more free, more liberty, right? More self-determination. But it's not, right? It's a guise. It may appear that way. It's my opinion anyway. It's this change, right? So yes, it seems like when you first step into it, wow, everything's faster and we can send things, it's more convenient. But then you stand back and you go, wow, it's also much more intense and encroaching, and I'm being surveilled, and they're listening to what I say, and all my data is documented. It's quite different, is it? Now, are you willing to trade some of that convenience and for what is it? Was it convenience? That's not the right word. For safety. I'm thinking of the quote. Those who would give up I'm blanking on it all of a sudden. But the famous quote simply meaning that if you would give up the convenience, or whatever word is used, for liberty, then you deserve neither. Or rather, liberty for convenience. Because it's always there. They always try to convince you, don't worry, it's faster and safer, and it'll give people their use of their arms again, but it'll also destroy the society that we're living in. So important to think about that, because this is what they're doing, in my opinion. So I just talked about Honduras regime change for Prospera on December 2nd. I noticed Orwell shared with me the Financial Times article we're going to get into. And I was already setting this up today in regard to like a follow-up because of some things that I saw. And it just really put this together in my mind. And so I was already discussing the actions that were taking place in Honduras. Trump pardons Hernandez, the previous president of Honduras, who, by the way, was completely tied in with Prospera. He was there and allowed this to illegally happen under his corrupt regime. That was the regime change in 2009 forward, right? They ultimately continued to manipulate this up until quite recently. I think 2022 is when he got removed, and the government then revoked everything. We'll read over it briefly. They're saying what they're doing is unconstitutional. They're suing. We'll get into all that in a second. But understand today, coming all the way back around, and I was already theorizing that Trump's administration was going to regime change Honduras because of this one thing for Prospera, and now here he is, talking about regime change in Honduras, for rather the manipulation of the election, which everyone seems to notice now, on top of the fact that he pardons the guy who allowed Prospera to happen. Everyone they're involved with in this country is tied into Prospera, and that's the point, guys. So I believe this is regime change for this network state transition. So this is where we are. This is the government. So when they used to regime change for oil, it's the same outcome, because the network state is the new most important direction. At least that's how I'm seeing this. Now, all of those things are important, the rare earth minerals. So none of the other parts are going to go away, but think of it in the same light. That it's not just some overlapping casual thing as I see it. And even if you think that, and even if that's the case, that means that he's willing to overthrow governments because Peter Thiel wants that. And that should be just as alarming. A lot of good stuff in this show you should watch. Jason did a great clip on this overlapping. I read this great report from vcinfodocs.com, Prospera, a network state colony in Honduras. And we went over all the stuff it really put a lot of it together in one place, tied it to all the things we're discussing. And it went over the connection to Honduras. And so, as he says, Prospera is a test run backed by the same billionaire investors pushing freedom cities in the United States, propped up by Trump's pardoned allies, and designed as a model for future land-grabbing mini-states run by tech elites. Important. You watch that if you want the quick point. Here is the clip or the post that Orwell had sent to me. Gil Duran says, the Financial Times finally covers the network state cult. Now, again, I think this is because of everyone out there. What we're doing, what you did. We're forcing this into the conversation. Now, there's been a conversation a lot about the general point, network state. There's a book about it, right? On top of the fact that I guarantee there's plenty of other people out there that maybe I don't see that have been screaming about this the same way. I'm not trying to pretend like I'm the only one talking about this. And those out there deserve credit for that, because it's the same boat a lot of us are in, where you just in a dark corner on the internet that they make sure nobody sees because of these important topics. But this is being discussed a different way. This is critical in a way that I have not seen. Now, maybe there are others, but this is new to me. And he writes, is this tech fascism? I think it is. I simply highlighted the topic is finally getting pushed into the average conversation, thanks to you, everyone out there, and what you're doing. So he followed up with the article, and he says that no mention of, actually, I think I was meant to put this over here. Yeah, it was right there. It's just, I'll mention this one at the end. It'll make more sense then. It's another example of one of these network states. So Financial Times. Tech elites are starting their own for-profit cities. This was published yesterday. Okay. Balaji, I think it's Srinivasan. Tell me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Former chief technology officer of Coinbase. So think about this overlap in Trump's administration too. And everyone's pointed it out, but just to think of it in your mind now, all the people that were all the deep state bad guys, according to everyone that supports him, are now the ones that are high-fiving with him. And it's all good because, Unity Party or whatever somehow makes that okay. All the arrests are not happening. But the people like Coinbase, the people are connected to things like this, or Google, or Silicon Valley in general. These were roundly considered to be the problematic in regard from the Republican perspective during COVID, the Great Reset, at least critical, right? And Gates and Amazon. I don't know why I'm blanking on names today. Bezos. they're supposed to be arrested. So we're told from a lot of these people. So this is just an example of another tech Silicon Valley billionaire oligarch type that is lined up with this agenda. Now, not exactly, there is overlaps with this person and Trump, but in regard to the large agenda that Trump is tapped into because of that inner circle. So he's the one discussing this, Balaji. He goes, I think it's fair to say, he pronounces from his stage, palms outstretched, in 2025, we have a movement. And I agree with that. Like there is momentum, at least within like the inner circle elitists, that they want this to change. A massive transition of the way we live in our society. It is early October, and Srinivasan is hosting what he's called the Network State Conference, an event targeting, quote, those interested in founding, funding, and finding new communities. For years, the entrepreneur has preached to clubby tech gatherings that they should gather their online comrades and set up a physical homeland, a network state, be that a city or a country, by joining together to buy land. He has hailed this as the ultimate exit by Silicon Valley from, quote, failing U.S. institutions and democracy. Now, I agree with the sentiment. Obviously, these things are failing. Now, you could argue to some degree it's by design, the kind of manufacturing the divide and the collapse to usher in what they want next. But either way, whether that's the case or not, what I think they're doing here is that they're pointing to something that we are all highlighting. Now, the status quo has benefited them to, billions over the years. These people have grossly benefited from the system. And so now that we are unhappy with it, they're getting uncomfortable because, they'll eat the rich meme and all the different things. They sense the fact that, the whole idea is that there's billions of us and just a small portion of them. And they worry about people recognizing what they're doing in the world. And that's something that's been expressed by recent billionaires more than once over the last couple of weeks. So now, and this is not just over the last couple of weeks, but this long-term change, because it's been happening for a while, is about saying, okay, yes, it's failing. Even though we've wildly benefited from it, it's failing. So here's the solution that we've quietly decided in the back will benefit us just as much, if not more. But we'll sell it to you as saving us from these failing things. And nothing embodies that better than what Trump is doing today, whether he knows that or not, in my opinion. But it goes on, what was a fringe concept a matter of years ago, rapidly changed, by the way, is now attracting more interest as scrappy startup chief executives, right? Scrappy billionaires. It's just funny. That's because this is the circle, guys. This is not some, Joe running the coffee shop at the corner who's like, I'm going to, maybe if you want to go try to join, but even then, this is not anybody can come join, as much as they try to frame it like that. But what's funny is we're talking about these inner circle oligarch elitists who are basically, the lower scale of it to the top scale, scrappy startup chief executives and aggrieved billionaires contemplate the allure of tech-friendly havens, unbound by legacy rules and regulation. While some are aspirational, reliant on their founders securing hard-to-come-by special economic zone status, like Prospera, there are now about 120 startup societies in the works. 120. This is exploding after the last couple of years. And there's no denying. Now, what's important to see is how this gained steam during Biden's administration, and it was earnestly kicked off during Trump's. Why? Because there really is at the end of the day, the government's the government, and it wants to benefit the government over you. And it says, according to an open source database shared by the Coinbase executive former, that this is 120 out there building. A few have received hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital from funds backed by the likes of investors like Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, OpenAI founder Sam Altman. Weird how he just happens to be involved with Stargate, and like Larry Ellison and the funding of the media apparatus and Zionism, and all this is incestuous overlap that we can see. And it says, and Brian Armstrong we'll talk about, and Coinbase chief executive, or that's the one we're talking about, or that's the current one. And this guy is Balaji's the former chief technology officer of Coinbase. Continuing, Srinivasan himself has started a network school on an artificial island near Singapore. So this is just spinning out, guys. I mean, now look, I could certainly be wrong about this. Maybe this will change the world for the better. I certainly don't think so. And I think the people involved with it make that quite clear based on their lack of principle and concern for human life. But it's really just about the fact that it's happening underneath us without really involvement from people that it's changing, right? I mean, this is the whole thing we're talking about. So a network school on an artificial island just shows you how this is kind of just exploding around us with not much conversation about it until now. And usually how that goes, right? Like, oh, look, we're there already. Too late. As it's been happening, we weren't talking about it. Where techno-optimists can work their day jobs remotely while living in a hotel together and learning about how to bootstrap or build a new society. And that's what they're talking about. Membership and accommodations, which he dubs society as a service, starts at $101,500 a month. Oh, okay. So in other words, you don't own anything, but you're totally happy. Got it. It's not different, guys. I mean, and this is Teal, Trump, Connection, Freedom City. It's the same conversation. For proponents, the initiatives offer the opportunity to address all that they believe has caused a decline in American dynamism. Hard, it's a weird word to say. From monetary policy to taxation. Yeah, I mean, again, there's clearly problems that we all are aware of that almost roundly, left and right, and everybody in between is calling out. So San Francisco in particular has for years been affected by high levels of homelessness and crime, prompting an exodus of tech workers during COVID. Quote, it's young people being dissatisfied with stagnation, corruption, and isolation. He says young people are clearly yearning to discover new ways of living and building through technology. Yes, that's the point. And this was the chief executive of AI coding company Replete. They're just this, whether he's the one doing it or not, the point is they see that we are clamoring for that. Never let a good crisis go to waste. But the movement's toughest critics, of whom there is no short supply, cast it as either a bid to play God or an attempt to avoid red tape, more opportunistic than idealistic. It's both, guys. Very clearly both. Others argue it is part of a broader rise in techno-fascism, that too, or a form of authoritarian rule by technocrats. It's all this. It's all the same conversation. Either way, they assert the movement is born from an elite victim complex. Now, I don't say that. I think he's projecting himself as, like they all are, the white race is under attack, which there are elements of that to be pointed out. But what they're framing is that they're the ones being focused on. They're worried that all of us will rise up against them. That's what they're really worried about. And I mean, to be clear, it's not even something I think this is what I've seen. I think one or two of them, one very prominent one over the recent, I think it was a couple of weeks, make that point, that they're worried. They're big compounds. They're buying houses elsewhere because they're worried about what's happening. And it's not because people are crazy. It's because people are restless, because because the crime and corruption is rampant and everyone sees it right now. Teal, who has a net worth of $27 billion, quite the victim, is one of the biggest funders of the space. Now, they go over a section here where he goes on to basically claim he's a victim. Truly, because of the way I could lose my money tomorrow, he says. Right. This whole movement, and this is from Patry Friedman, and we've talked about this person before. This is the grandson of free market economist Milton Friedman. And I think that's why this is getting certain attention around libertarianism. And this guy doesn't, I mean, whether he maybe thinks he's doing that is not, but even the way he describes this, I get the bad sense from this. And so this person is making it sound like that, but at the end of the day, it's what we're talking about. He says this whole movement is about reinventing governance for the 21st century. Now, would a libertarian want to reinvent governance? Possibly in a smaller way, but that's not what this is. This is much more governance. And on top of that, as much as they want to frame it otherwise, there's less governance and red tape for corporations and their actions. But if you don't follow along, you can get boxed out, turned off, like everything else we're talking about. This is reinventing governance. That's exactly what he's saying. Is that what you're deciding? Now, you may argue it's only happening in select areas around the world, but this is something that is actively changing. These billionaire oligarchs are largely independent of nation. We've talked about that. They are ultimately guiding this change, and a lot of it is happening in this country. We'll get to Greenland in a minute. The only reason that seems to have happened was because Teal wanted it. And that's what we're talking about. This is influencing directly the actions of our government. Now it says the whole movement is about reinventing governance, inspired by startups and the internet, says Friedman, grandson of Milton Friedman, and founder of Pronomos Capital, a venture firm that invests in experimental cities. Yeah, we've talked about Pronomos Capital, and it's alarming. It is this article here, the show, and it is, as I said, a rapid transition to techno-feudal state. And it's the large fund with Teal connected, that are funding a lot of these things. And from what I can see, there's no way, unless he's come somehow outside the box, that he wouldn't see some of these problems. That he would be able to recognize that this in no way aligns with libertarian values. Quote, he is attempting to create cities that are run like a for-profit company rather than by democratically elected officials. Now that, again, there's plenty of these general statements could be applied in a world that might exist without what they're doing. But it's the undercurrent of the technocratic control that basically makes moot what they're trying to do with the feigned libertarian direction. But so no elected officials, okay, but I'm not saying I want government in the first place, but they're just circumventing government with corporations. But they still have power. They still have influence and control over your life. They still set laws that you have to follow, but you're not electing them now. Okay, so then what happens if you go, I don't agree with that law? I think that's unjust. I think you're not applying it correctly. I think that you just made that up. Well, too bad. Either get out or do what you're told. I mean, think about where that will go, guys. Are you pretending they're going to somehow arbitrate? I mean, I guess maybe from a corporate perspective, you go to arbitration, right? How well does that work out today? Ask yourself how well the billionaire companies allow you to use that. It's like, imagine being on a phone with an automated service that takes all day to try to get something you know you deserve. That's the analogy that you should apply to this. Welcome to the future of your corporate-run city that totally cares about what you like. Wait on, press number 1 for American. But it says, oh, I just lost it. Where was it? Yeah, that's right. Quote, a private venture-backed company is the city operator and its directors design the laws and they earn revenue through some combination of rents, taxes, services fees. Taxes? Service fees? So you have no influence over what they're deciding and doing, but you have to just bow to what their decisions are. Sure sounds libertarian to me, doesn't it? For this to work, however, he needs targeted countries to pass legislation that will delegate to his projects the quote, right to write some subset of the regulations. And this gets into the interesting part of this, which is why this is sort of a land grab colonial thing, where you're convincing countries that are already in a weak state because of usually U.S. foreign policy to give up some level of their control over certain areas to their benefit, of course, in the moment anyway, and then allow them to sort of get in and change certain things, which would then violate what arguably would be their constitution or whatever we're talking about. And then what we're seeing in Honduras is, well, we disagree now, so we're suing you. And it's being used as an example for why no country should ever allow this to happen. It's kind of blowing up in their face. And that's exactly why I think this was meant to be put back to bed, and it's not working. Yeah, as in regime change, Honduras, everything's good now, go back to bed, nobody talk about Prospera. So it says, recently he has been exploring opportunities in 8 countries in Africa. 8 countries. Many countries in Africa are kept in destabilized states because it benefits the West. And so you're stepping in and exploiting that situation. And largely, this is why a lot of them are angry that China is making deals with them that in many ways does benefit them, does allow them to grow back out of that, but ultimately does benefit China. And they probably use their strong arm tactics too, but they're making a deal versus what the U.S. has been doing its entire existence. Proposing initiatives that will develop around their existing economic engine, whether that is agriculture or cheap renewable power or bioengineering gene therapy. But it says, Friedman is confident that some legislation will be passed next year. It's happening, guys. Like this, he's talking about legislation being passed in governments to allow this to start happening. Now, part of this is about the United States, as he's discussed. Who's to say that's what he's aiming at right now? But it's happening. It says, the product market fit today for what I do, I strongly believe is helping the global South to become first world. Right. As opposed to think about what we're talking about. Look at what Trump right now is doing to Somalia, or it's not the global South, but we're talking about, Venezuela, or any number of other points we could make. And then saying that because they're struggling because they're bad, but we'll swing in and give them a startup city and it'll bring them into the first world. It's insulting to pretend like the governments of the West have not always kept their foot on the neck of most of these countries. And now you're going to swing in and steal land and pretend like you're benefiting them. It's manipulative. Now it says, during Barack Obama's presidency, far-right blogger Curtis Yarvin, of course he's connected to this. That's the ideological backbone behind a lot of what these people think, as we'll talk about, or I've shown you here. This is Derek's article. Meet the man whose philosophy has influenced Peter Thiel and the technocrats. That's Yarvin right there. He's the one that they've referenced in regard to the oligarchy beating, the good oligarchs beating the bad oligarchs, and Trump's reference to Napoleon and the Machiavellian points, sue, deny. That's what this all comes from. That's what these people operate as. And here was the one he wrote first: meet the Peter Thiel acolytes in Donald Trump's second administration. See, 2025, 2024. Yeah, we've been calling this out long before. We've been called black pill and purity test. All the ones now finally starting to call it out were the ones telling us we shouldn't be talking. You're not the adults in the room. Yeah, we were correct, by the way. And it's very easy to see. So Curtis Yarvin called for the global order to be substituted. The global order to be substituted with thousands of, quote, sovereign and independent many countries, each governed by its own joint stock corporation without regard to the residents' opinions. That's exactly what he said. That's what Curtis Yarvin said. That's the quiet part out loud because no one's listening when he's saying that to a circle of oligarchs. But now it's getting highlighted. The point is that now they're out there going freedom and liberty and it's going to save you and libertarian. And that's what they're really talking about. Sovereign and independent, many countries, the countries, the people running them, not you, each governed by its own joint stock corporation. So it's a company, the ones dumping things in your ocean and water and, taking advantage with no regulation. Each governed by its own joint corporation without regard to the residents' opinions. It's just insane how obvious that is. That's not why would anybody want that? So they could benefit off of you being there? Now, maybe if everything just by default was exactly what you wanted, and then you knew for somehow magically it would never change, none of those things being absolute or even possible because they're not considering what you want. I mean, even that, it's just, guys, this just is so transparent when you look at it closely. Some of the earliest investments into tech-aligned nation building came from Thiel, of course, who in 2008 donated $500,000 to the Seasteading Institute, a nonprofit founded by Friedman dedicated to setting up autonomous floating societies atop platforms in international waters. So they originally tried. Now it pretty much collapsed, but it has started up again. That's what I've been referencing. I'll get to that in a minute. But they were trying to do this, in places in the middle of the ocean. Why? Because it's maritime law. It's international waters. Same point, by the way, why it's illegal for Trump to ultimately bomb these people under the guise of what U.S. law. Anyway, we'll get to that toward the end briefly. But this is because it was something that we could do what we want. We can do our weird gene therapy experiments. Now they're just trying to take land and do it here. This failed because of problem. It was difficult to do it in the ocean. But now they've got momentum, more funding, so it's going back to it. It says the crypto boom has breathed new life into the broader space. That's important to understand. With Trump's hard lean into Bitcoin, there's a reason for this. That's what Prospera and the rest are using, Bitcoin and crypto, and this is what they use to basically try to make this the backbone of the United States. This is all part of the same transition. It's just very clear to me. Derek's been calling this out more than anybody, long before most anybody. Now it says, if decentralized currencies could be created outside of government oversight, could a new type of society be built on top of these currencies? Right. But you see, they're not talking about using Monero. They're not talking about using something that is actually, what they're talking about is not decentralized. They're talking about a CBDC or stablecoin in the same light. That's not decentralized, guys. What they're doing is using what we're calling for and trying to circumvent it or co-opt it for what their purposes are. And this, guys, is exactly what we've been talking about. It is a CBDC or stablecoin version of that's used to track and surveil and be able to turn off and tons of other things. Let me include this one for you because I think this is there it is. I think it was the IMA panel we did on this, and Derek and everybody else was included. Co-opting freedom, the Bitcoin sleight of hand, and the new AI control structure. Oh, you know what I'll grab too? This one is I need to revisit this. I want to get him back on for an interview. Mitch Bertram and I had a really good conversation about where this all goes and literally about the AI Bitcoin technocratic side of this in January 2025. And how this was going to potentially be used in shocking ways around surveillance. And look at where we are. Palantir and all the rest. It says how the government commandeered Bitcoin and its decentralized future. Because that's what we're talking about, guys. They turned it into the opposite of what it was designed to be. And you can read the white paper. It's clear. It was meant to circumvent the financial structure, not become it. So they co-opted it. In 2022, Srinivasan published his book, The Network State. Right. I mean, I haven't read it, So I find it hard to believe that it will be, laying it all out the way it's actually going to be, but maybe it's worth reading. I think I have it on order. The point is, it's something that who knows, there's so many things I have to read still, but the book itself is highlighting, or really just kind of showing you that this is a real movement. All right. They want to change radically the way our society operates. Quote, you can found a tribe just like you can found a startup. This is Srini Vasan, former chief technology officer of Coinbase. It says that's what Joseph Smith did with the Mormons. Now, just the statement of that. So you're talking about building a new religion? Well, guess what? That's actually not that far from what a lot of people see in this conversation. If you really dive into their ideology, some of these people, the Teals and Musks, they start to see themselves as prophets of the technocratic age, or borderline becoming gods when they put their mind in the cloud and become universal, become immortal. And whether it's possible or not, that's what they're driving towards. Now, we're going to come back to this in a second, but we've talked about this in the past. Peter Thiel and trying to live forever with his ambrosia, harvesting young blood, all the way right up until recently with this still happening. And the idea of Jim O'Neill and the longevity movement and him being RFK's right-hand man. These are all these are technocrats, transhumanists. It's happening in front of us. So the Mormons, right? We can start a new religion. This is how a lot of them see this new transition. If they can literally put your brain on a cloud, which makes you immortal, they would see themselves as sort of gods in this scenario, or prophets of guiding you there. It's terrifying to me. It's also pretty blasphemous when it comes from people screaming about Christian rights, or the Christian ideology from the Christian right. Now it says that's what Abraham did. See, many different religious overlaps. That's what Jesus did. He goes, what I'm really calling for is something like tech Zionism. So, of course, the idea with what we're really talking about here, which I know they're all very aware of because it's all very public today, is a political ideology that has co-opted another group's ideology, or rather religion, and seized it for their own, and then used it to commit shocking atrocities while claiming to be saving everybody. If there's a better analogy for what I just described, I don't know what it is. Seizing territory that's not theirs, taking over societies that we don't want to give up, and turning it into something that is framing it as helping everybody, which is ultimately a technocratic techno feudalism. I cannot believe that and this is because so many of these people, and by the way, this was in 2022. So before the massive awareness about Zionism, so it's probably why he wrote that. But guys, this is where it's going. I don't know how to make that any more clear, but there's plenty more to go. Some venture capitalists have invested deeply in crypto projects that are worthless unless future economies run on their crypto tokens, he says. So what this shows me is, this is really being presented as sort of like this altruistic movement to save everybody from the bad war. Most of them are in it for themselves, like most of these corporate companies, CEOs and companies are like self-evident. It's clear what their goal is. And so many of them have chosen to invest because they see the writing on the wall in currencies, crypto tokens that will become super valuable when this becomes the predominant financial paradigm. So does that mean they want this new future, or does that mean that they're trying to support whatever technocratic dystopian future is happening so they can make some extra money? Well, I think you can decide what you think is more likely. They are therefore incentivized to promote network states with their large crypto component to keep the dream alive, he says, and have assumed the big role in not simply funding this, but being the key figureheads of this. That's how they see themselves. In Mountainhead, which we've referenced before, a 2025 movie on Netflix. Remember, it was an interesting time. I overlapped it with the deep fake point. And really, as it says here, 4 tech moguls in the movie were in a Utah lodge. And they essentially plot how they might set up a new world order. And it says perhaps one of the characters suggests they should take over El Salvador, interesting connection, as a test run, or just straight heads right for the United States. That's what they were. It was I forget his name now. Both their names. There's 2 good actors in that. Guy from The Office. I'm blanking on his name all of a sudden. Steve Carell. He played the larger investor, older guy. One of them played like an Elon Musk character. It was really well done. But so they're literally talking about changing the way society operates and talking about building a new world order and regime changing El Salvador, and even flirting with the idea, why don't we just start with the United States? Well, I overlapped it with the idea of the deep fake point, and that was what started it. Is ultimately Elon's character in this released a deep fake function for his app, Twitter, or whatever it was in the show, and everything was melting down around the world. Now, you could even argue that was by design for the way the story is being set up, but ultimately it was that they were discussing so blithely that it was happening, and that, people were posting deep fakes of government, atrocities happening, and governments were bombing each other, and nothing was really happening. And the whole world was spinning out, and they were talking about how they could take control, how they could benefit from it. It's just so important to think. I mean, it's a movie, right? But historically, there's a reason these things are floated out. Predictive programming and all. But it says the reality may be just as wild. Arguably, the most evolved experiment in alternative governance is Prospera, a gated private community on a Honduran island run by a Delaware-based company. A company right now that's, by the way, illegal. That the Honduran government says unconstitutional, not allowed to be here, and they don't care. They're suing them, trying to stay, waiting for Trump to regime change the country. Its founder, of course, Venezuelan-born wealth fund manager Eric Bremen, who we mentioned recently, describes his work as an evolved way to drive socioeconomic development through public-private partnerships. It really is astounding to me how very clear it is with every part of this. Just the buzz parts of everything we were highlighting about the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset, it's all happening through Trump right now, and Palantir and all the same moving parts. World Economic Forum calls itself the world's leader in public-private partnerships, and that was what we all focused on, talking about what that meant and the fascistic overlap and how they can hide information. No, it's a private company as the government's involved. And now the Republicans are going, the ones that are blinded to this. I argue, as usual, the majority of conservatives, I think, are seeing most of this. Maybe still supporting Trump, but are still seeing it. But you get the team sport politics people are going, yay, that's now a good thing because Trump's there. But it says, as evidence that the initiative is very much focused on lifting people up, including Hondurans, that's not happening. Now, we'll get into that as we read through this, as even a location called Crawfish Rock is screaming about what they're doing environmentally, seizing part of their territory. Nothing libertarian about encroaching on territory in a, colonial way, or colonialism type, seizing territory. It's, land grab, ethnic cleansing, same kind of conversation, because you're changing it the way you want it. Already, it has raised tens of millions of dollars from Friedman's Pernomos Capital. That's Prospera. And backed by Altman and Andreessen, of course, among others. In January, Brian Armstrong announced that Coinbase, the bastion of freedom and liberty, and their venture arm would invest in Prospera as it was in line with its mission of creating economic freedom. This is happening. Prospera, their hands-off approach, they claim, to medical regulation has made it a mecca for people seeking experimental treatments as the field of longevity or trying to live forever, as what it means, becomes more popular in Silicon Valley. Former tech founder turned biohacker influencer Brian Johnson went there for otherwise unapproved gene therapy treatment. It's not that secret or anything, but I've been trying to tell people that they're working on, gene therapy. I don't have any reason to doubt that they would be working on gain of function type things as well. It's anybody who's involved with them can go there and do what they want. Why would that not be concerning, knowing what we just went through? But the point here is that this is happening, and it's being in many ways done to people that don't want to be involved in it. And I don't necessarily mean experimentation, but who knows, because no one's paying attention. But I mean about the surrounding area, what that could mean for the environment and everything else. Prospera shuns the network state label, of course, saying that it follows Honduran sovereignty. It actually says that, by the way, even though it's being sued by Honduras for being unconstitutional, or rather, they're suing Honduras because they're telling them to move because they're unconstitutional. But they sit here claiming that they're, it's no different than Trump and everybody else, Biden too. We respect Iraq's sovereignty, but no, we're not going to leave. No, you don't then. You're lying. Critics argue that the special economic zones legislation that allowed for Prospera to be established was championed by, and this is what I was just talking about, a corrupt former government whose leader, Juan Orlando Hernandez Alvaro, was just been released from prison. Trump pardoned him, where he was serving a sentence for narco trafficking and weapons crimes. So, I mean, isn't it interesting this is what this article came out. This was yesterday. It's just interesting that I get the sense that some of these things tend to happen because it's important to get over the top of people in the independent media talking about this. And I'm by no means the first one to talk about it. But what I was really trying to highlight over the last week was that what Trump just pardoned, Hernandez Alvaro, was the guy who allowed this to happen and was arrested for drug trafficking, and then for like 400 tons of cocaine, I think. And then he pardons him and then he goes, we're fighting narco trafficking going after Venezuela, even though there's literally no fentanyl that's coming from there. It's confounding. It's just embarrassing. So this is clear. This is, to me, it's about, all of this seems to connect to this larger agenda. That doesn't mean it's the only thing happening in all of it, but all of this clearly connects back to this one agenda. It says the government at time of writing this article, this was the election that took place in Honduras, November 30th. It says since tried to repeal its charter on the grounds that, quote, or rather, as ruled by the country's Supreme Court, self-governing special economic zones are unconstitutional. In general, it is. That's applying their constitution. The only reason it was allowed was because Hernandez Alvarez let it happen. And remember, I told you about the Supreme Court, how they manipulated the court to allow them to get the zone in the first place. It's been criminal activity from the very beginning. Prospera is now suing the government for $11 billion, which is 2/3. See, this is weird. Okay, that's what I originally reported. So when I first read this, the reporting I saw was that it was 1/3 of their GDP. The article we just read the other day, which again is why you should not take at face value anything from corporate media, but they said 2/3. But this now says just under 1/3 of the country's GDP. Now, I'll take that back. I argue that's because it probably has changed over the years because some of this data was from, 2020, anyway. So right now, apparently, if Financial Times is correct, same point though. Just under 1/3 of the entire GDP of the country, which, guys, if you understand it, this would bankrupt. If they did that, the country would go bankrupt and they would end up giving assets. I make this point every time. And so the government would not go away, but effectively you would have the real power of the governance of the country in the hands of Prospera, which is a coup if you look at it in the right light, on top of the fact that they're expanding their territory. And it says, Guillaume Long, Ecuador's former Minister of Foreign Affairs and a research fellow with the Center for Economic Policy and Research, described it to the author of this article as a predatory project in a weak state, adding, if you're a weak state and you're giving over large portions of land to a private state, there's a really dystopian, really futuristic, and really feudal aspect to this. It's very clear. Now, if it was exactly what they said it was, libertarian, freedom, bastion free, if that was the case, there'd be a conversation to be had. Just because it's debatable whether or not that might be a positive transition, but what they're doing, when you can see what they're doing and who they support and what they espouse, it's not what they're claiming it is. It is feudal, guys. It is a techno-feudalism that is on display right now that is very concerning to me. Cornell University historian Raymond Karib, author of Adventure Capitalism, A History of Libertarian Exit from the Era of Decolonialization to the Digital Age, says it offers a warning to elected politicians about the dangers of carving out semi-autonomous zones. Quote, precisely what Prospera is doing, suing Honduras, is precisely the argument governments are going to make about why you should not be editing your constitution to allow this. Of course, let alone whether, who knows within the independent country's constitutions, whether it's even legal to edit your constitution. Like, in example, like I always make, there's a point you made about things that are repugnant to the Constitution, as the Supreme Court's ruled in the past, Mayberry versus Madison, and the idea that means it's not constitutional or legal if you add an amendment that says you can't own a gun. Well, that's repugnant to the Constitution. So it's, we've talked about this. So that's worthy of consideration, right? That maybe in the first place, they weren't even allowed to do that. But it says Bremen waves off much of the criticism as lazy, standing by his decision to sue the Honduran government. He says, quote, what they need to do is follow the law. He actually said that. Quote, that is the way it should be, and I'm proud of it. And Hondurans will be better for it. This is just gross. I mean, either this guy is so shockingly out of the know of what's going on in his own location, or he's very dishonest. They're breaking the law in every possible way. Right now, the government that's there is telling them they're not allowed to be there. This is the elected government. Not even Trump. No one's claiming they're not the legitimate government. Well, I take it back. the 30th, I haven't checked up on whether they're still tallying, but this before it was what I'm talking about, before the recent election, and they were there. They got voted in. Okay. And you're unconstitutional. You have to leave. Follow the law. Well, that is the law. They're the one, it's just, and of course, the illegal regime change that got him there, the Supreme Court, it's all the same stuff. So he's just lying to your face, right? And I'm telling you, they're biding their time in hopes that they have manipulated the election to put the person in place that will allow them to stay. Watch, hopefully not, but when that person gets put there, he's going to be pro-Israel, pro-U.S. agendas, even when it hurts Honduras, and it's going to scream for network states and Honduras and Prospero. Mark my words. Donald Trump promised during his 2024 presidential campaign that he would develop 10 charter cities, network states, same thing, freedom cities, smart cities, 15-minute cities in the U.S., dubbed freedom cities, in order to boost American innovation in light of the U.S.-China tech race, sending ripples of excitement through the space and promoting some projects to now lobby for their own initiatives to be taken up. Mark Lutter, founder of the nonprofit Charter Cities Institute, released a white paper about turning Guantanamo Bay into a freedom city. No joke. With the tagline, "From detention to development." Meanwhile, Silicon Valley billionaires, including Mark Andreessen, Reid Hoffman, Michael Moritz, have put money into California Forever, is what it's called. A group that has quietly bought up $1 billion worth of land in Solano County in its bid to build a walkable mega development with affordable housing and a shipping complex without extra autonomy. Right. So slight difference, right? But ultimately, the same group with the same agenda, the same mindset, buying up land. How long until they try to petition or change laws within the government, or, through a very Zionist-like tactic, infiltrate the very governments themselves and make happen, like they did in Honduras, what they want in these locations? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that won't happen. But it's certainly possible. And so if we're worried about this encroaching thing and where they're buying up land within the United States, maybe we should be worried. Of course, when they're screaming about other things, which we should care about too, China buying land, right? That matters. But isn't it the same concern? How about Israel doing the same thing that they don't want to criticize? It's only when other groups do it. There's clearly something going on here. Israel creating startup cities and startup companies. Don't miss the overlapping terms in this country. Making fake shell companies, affecting the supply chain to our favor. It's the same conversation. 29-year-old Dryden Brown, a techno-utopian city-state, or they've created a techno-utopian city-state called Praxis. We're going to touch on a couple of these. That's the image I used today. We're going to touch on a couple of these as we go past this article. There's more than you'd like to believe, trust me. Now, it says the key word in the scene would be based, says Richard Crabe. Seriously. He says, are you based? How based are your views? Like, these people, it's like Elon Musk and the dark MAGA thing and the way he acted on stage. They're throwing at the same reason they're going libertarian, freedom. They're just throwing at you what you think, what you want to hear. I mean, it's like you can picture a bunch of like 40-something ad executives going in there. What do the hip kids say today? Oh, you're based, and like trying to act like they want. It's just kind of sad to me. Either way, maybe he just thinks that way. The point is, I think it's about trying to align yourself with the common, the societal norms, make it feel like you're just another thing trying to fight for what they believe in. Another Praxis diner, who spoke on condition of anonymity, is less generous. It says, quote, I felt like everyone was pontificating with the intellectual caliber of a state college seminar. The person says, still, Crabeset was drawn to the project as a, quote, moonshot investment in something divergent, with a distinct neo-Promethean aesthetic, he explains, which is weird enough to me. The whole point of that is they see themselves as beginning some new, not just a new city, guys. There's deeper meanings in these words they're using. And it says he is not alone. Brown explains he has assembled 150,000 prospective citizens, among them key members of Elon Musk's controversial so-called Department of Government Efficiency initiative. Of course there's that. And he has raised early funds from investors like Friedman's Pronomos Capital. Of course, Sam Altman's Apollo projects. Yeah. The consistency is it's all the same people, same things, same agenda. And the Winklevoss twins, right? All the patriots fighting the deep state, right, guys? Followed by $500 million from crypto investment companies. Praxis recently announced plans to start a defense-focused spaceport city. Cool. So a defense-focused. So war, is it important for these people to be funding the war state while they're building the libertarian state? I mean, come on, these are hypocrites of the highest order. And it says called Atlas at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, already home to companies including Musk's SpaceX and Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, but they're all saving you guys. This, experts note, could become a hub for defense tech companies and workers at a moment when U.S. venture capital is readily flowing into the space. Great, unregulated, unreviewed military apparatus. I mean, come on, guys, this is over the top. But Brown is also looking to establish a non-U.S. city that can, quote, accelerate Western traditional progress next year, citing the potential future need for a techie escape from America. He says there has been deep integration with the tech elites in the Valley and D.C. in the White House in the Trump administration. Yeah, that's saying it lightly. They have taken over his administration like pretty much every other one in the past who's been bought out by whatever, Citibank or whatever it is. Brown, and he says, quote, but if we get a populist Democrat in 2028, Zohran Mamdani, you know, the one that Trump's literally like high-fiving with about the future of MAGA in New York, but apparently they hate him here because, you know, it's just all disjointed, or an AOC, the fear is that the friendliness might not persist towards technology. Right. So it has nothing to do with whether those people actually embody what Americans might want or maybe actually call out Zionism. And trust me, I don't think Mamdani doesn't. I'll get into it more in the future. He already pulled back on certain things. He seems like one more of the same kind of Tulsi Gabbard types, if you want to be honest. But I hope for better, like I always do. But they really just want somebody there that is amenable to what they want to happen. It's not about some vision for the future. It's about what they want, how they can benefit, how they can get what they want through power, coercion, and money. It's my opinion anyway. It says many, quote, are not anti-state, but are efforts to rework what the relationship with the state is. So not all of them are some new location, right? But remember, all the same people in different levels of effort and style. Some of them are just efforts to try to change the relationship with the state, right? So different actions are happening in different places. It's all part of the same thing. If it's happening from the same people, same funding, with the same agenda. So in some cases, you're just immersing yourself in a local area and trying to change the state's relationship with you in ways that are not involved with democracy or voting or whatever you want to think it normally is. It says he notes that Prospera has caught the interest of some U.S. politicians. I didn't know this, and this is horrifying to me. With a small group of Republican officials, of course, from Florida visiting the site in November. So they just went there last month. They went to Prospera. It says in a blog post, Prospera said this underscores the growing U.S. interest in Prospera, Honduras as a platform for investment, innovation, economic growth. So Trump invests in this, hypothetically. What do you think that's going to amount to? This will become a model. That's the way they're trying to put it forward. And if you've got Republican politicians literally touring this with the idea of freedom cities being funded by Pronomos Capital, you can connect those dots pretty easily. I just think that's pretty obvious and pretty concerning. Quote, it's not just another version of Burning Man, they write. Let me sure I missed that. Yeah. It's not just another version of Burning Man, he writes. It's wedged into the new round of people who have begun to occupy the corridors of government. See? You could argue that in and of itself is part of this globalist Zionist technocratic sort of coup of transition, which, that's exactly what I've been calling this. Oh, shoot. Oh, that's frustrating. Oh, I'm glad I have my screenshots. That's why I do that. I didn't mean to close that. Now I just forgot what I was. Oh, that's right. This is the article I often bring up in that point because I really did focus specifically on this general point. The new Trump administration and the technocratic Zionist coup of the United States. You could have just as easily added technocratic globalist Zionist coup. It's really, if you really look, it's all part of the same overlapping agenda. And maybe it's because they've joined. I think it's really just about the same forces who are ultimately trying to grab the reins. Now let me see here where I left off. Burning Man. Where is it? Right underneath that. Okay. There we go. So it says, oh, it's one more. Oh, really? How did I miss that? Oh, well, let's go from here. So it says, it's not just another, wait, It's not just another Burning Man. It's wedged into the new round of people who have begun to occupy the corridors of government. So in the cabinets. So that's why I went to that article. It's just that we're talking about some kind of forced, and look, it doesn't have to be some, Israel foreign power. I mean, I do think that's part of it. But, just like we saw, like I mentioned, with Citibank and Obama, like we've watched the lobbying completely infiltrate every time. And so now part of that is not just money for policy, but transitioning everything we're doing. And that the idea behind this meant this movement, this network state movement, has now begun to wedge itself into the corridors of our government. It says there's a convergence that's troubling. It says there's also a lingering question of the impacts of the projects in local communities where they are built, with critics casting them as likely to displace or harm citizens. And they're already doing that. Prospera has been publicly castigated by some residents of a neighboring African Caribbean fishing village called Crawfish Rock for disrupting their local community. Now, this happened a long time ago, well before this was getting public notice. These people have been calling out what they've been doing environmentally, politically, pretty much since the beginning. Freeman claims these critics are being paid by a political party, which there's no evidence for. I've looked at that myself. Friedman initially pushes back on the notion of these projects as neo-colonialist, declaring most of our projects are greenfield, he pauses. Although in Africa, we're looking at the land parcels large enough that there will be people living there, in which case we will offer relocation bonuses to pay for anybody who wants to move out of the zone. Right. So it's not neo-colonialist, but if you want to, we'll pay you to move somewhere else. And do you think if it were in an important location and you didn't want to move, that they would just go, okay, you can just screw our whole plan? No, they'll find ways to move you, just like Israel's finding ways to move them. Hey, Israel also offered to pay, didn't they? During their genocide. Now, maybe that's a harsh comparison, guys, but just say you're not doing neo-colonialism and then literally coming in and taking over other people's territory and moving them somewhere else. It's on the nose. And it says, and what about fears that this marks the rise of techno-fascism? It says, quote, I mean, we are funding companies that will operate non-democratic cities, he says. And if you're not into that, you shouldn't move there. Wow. Oh, just right at the end anyway. So that's in the conversation right now. A rapid transition to techno-feudal state. Oh, and this was the original point I did on this back in September 2024. The technocratic regime change under the guise of freedom, technocrats are slowly taking control. Look at that. Well before all of this is just what I read in that situation. Hope I'm wrong. So overlapping this with the recent show we did, this was September. Trump's warp speed, CDC's Jim O'Neill we pointed to, transhumanism, and Gaza freedom cities. It's important to see that is also part of that. Which it really does bring that together in the Zionism overlap. In this very plan, that, by the way, most of these Republican screaming talking heads acted like was a false story, fake release. No, it's real. And now it's been very much proven. The Great Trust. Now, this, as they highlight themselves, is a technocratic structure. It goes on to talk about, I don't know exactly where it was again. I just pulled it up. It was right in, ID-based digital system. This is exactly what we're all calling out. And they call it a technocratic governance. And they're telling you this is the future for Gaza or whoever they allow to live there. But no Palestinians will be welcome. That's not a joke, by the way. That is taking advantage of a circumstance. And it's all happening around you. How long until you're the Gazans? Guys, maybe you're in Honduras, maybe you're in the United States. So Jim O'Neill is the overlap of the longevity part of it. So not only are we transitioning in governance and everything else, you're getting, like they said, they're finding their ways in the corridors of government. So this guy is being, whether put there because this influence or not, he's finding his way into a position to make an influence on the very movement that Peter Thiel and the rest are trying to make happen through these unregulated locations. It's really impossible to miss how all this ties together. Now, just to overlap with that point, going back to 2017, The Guardian. Ambrosia, the startup harvesting the blood of the young. It's not a joke. It was even parodied on Silicon Valley, the show. Now, it kind of went away, but not really. And what's so weird about this is they even claim, or the science came out and says it doesn't do anything. Kind of makes me wonder whether we got put quietly behind the scenes because it didn't really stop. Jump forward 2 more years. The FDA says buying young people's blood won't stop you from aging. But Silicon Valley tech oligarchs are still doing that. This one was from 2023. Bloodthirsty Silicon Valley vampires won't stop. It's time to stake your claim. It's no secret that for years now, the ultra wealthy, including Silicon Valley tech moguls like Peter Thiel and Brian Johnson, there's your network state people, have taken up the Elizabeth Bathory method of obtaining eternal youth, young blood. How creepy is that? Injecting young blood. Now it says there are all these people who say that death is natural, Brian says. Or no, Peter Thiel, excuse me. And he says it's natural. It's just part of life. He goes, I think nothing can be further from the truth, he says. 2012. Okay, well, you're right to your opinions, don't you? But stop pretending to be out there talking about Christians, right, the Christian right, and lining yourself with the Christian movement. If you're talking about there is no death, then you can't pretend you believe in these things. And this is a lot of these people who are trying to align themselves with the Zionist Christian right. Jesus fed bread and wine for an all afterlife without guarantee, tweeted Johnson. I feed you olive oil for continued life and money back guarantee. Yeah, some might call that blasphemous. But watch as they line themselves up next to the people who do believe in these things. They're fronting, guys. There's a lot of manipulative people out there. Now, shout out to Gil Duran again for pointing this out. Now, John points this out as well. He says, well, sounds uncannily like the idea behind what's called a forest city being planned for a greenfield site in Suffolk. Now, what's funny is that's the term he used when he said I'm not neocolonialist, we're more greenfield. Well, here's one of those examples. He says just happens to be fronted by those with tech backgrounds. It's in the UK. So I'm not going to go into this one or the rest of these in depth. I'm just going to give you some of these more examples. The point was the broader overlap. I guarantee you I'll be doing more deep focuses on certain ones of these as it becomes more prominent. Hopefully not. But, special autonomous zone, all of it. It's the same exact thing, guys. It's happening all around the world. Now, I think that was already clear, but in the UK too, in case that wasn't clear. This one's called Itana. A Peter Thiel-backed startup city wants to be Africa's Delaware. It's all over, guys. I mean, it's happening all around the world. This is 2023. This is 2023 as well, September. This one's called Praxis Society. Guess what? Peter Thiel-linked startup is courting New York's scenesters and plotting a libertarian paradise. This is the Greenland Point, 2025, January. Big tech stands to profit from U.S. takeover of Greenland. Peter Thiel is among the investors bankrolling Praxis Nation, a project aiming to use Greenland to establish a crypto state. When Trump first proposed buying the Arctic nation during his first administration, it was treated like a joke. Remember, we got told you're falling, you're being trolled. Remember that? But in a phone call last week with Denmark, it seems like they were being trolled. It was Thiel that was calling the shots. In a call with Denmark's prime minister, who controls the autonomous territory's foreign policy, the president doubled down on his efforts to seize power. In the, quote, aggressive and confrontational conversation, Trump threatened tariffs if he didn't get his way. In a news conference earlier this month, he also refused to rule out use of military force. We touched on that. Now, Denmark is taking him seriously. On Monday, it announced a $2 billion military expansion in the Arctic. Though the island is not for sale, the president emphasized Greenland's importance to U.S. national security. So you see where this goes? So it started as, we may want to work with them and take over. Oh, well, if you don't give it what we want, even though it's not yours to take, we'll tariff you. Sanction, same thing at this point. Not really, but, it's coercive. And then U.S. national security, if nothing else works, national security, we can do what we want, right? So it all started when Peter Thiel said, I want that. Give me that, Trump. And here we go. Now, I'm sure there's more parts to it, guys, but this seems to be the origin point for why that became a topic. It connects to a larger agenda that I'm starting to think is the largest agenda, at least right now. Let's also not forget this is the show we did in January 2025. As Israel's globalist ambitions become clear, Team Sport Republicans, Alex Jones in mind in this, endorsed North American Union. Remember, they were showing that map, the technocracy. It's the whole thing. And it was the larger North American Union point. It included Canada and Greenland and Mexico. And all of a sudden, they were talking about all those things at the same time. And the Greenland they were genuinely looking at that. Right? See, it's just embarrassing for people that were calling this out before, like we mentioned, and then acted like this was about freedom and liberty and changing the world. Also, Forbes, this one is from 2023. A teal-backed startup pitched a futuristic city in Bhutan. Its Dragon King is building it without them. Now, it could be, and it wouldn't surprise me. Governments are pretty ruthless and, willing to challenge whatever they want, forget what they want. But it also could be that there's more connection that they don't want you to see. It says after a startup shared its idea for a tech Shangri-La with Bhutan's royal government, the kingdom disavowed the project. Now it's preparing to announce its own mindfulness-focused megacity. More importantly, the startup, backed by one of billionaire Peter Thiel's VC firms, had secured letters of intent from 19 foreign tech companies. Oh, okay, so it is connected to Thiel. So the point is, he came and said, here's an idea. And they go, we don't want to do that. And then he goes, okay, and leaves. And then they go, we're building our own thing. So you stole our idea, but we're funding you behind the scenes. Like, it's just kind of a lazy way to act. Like, to me, that shows you that this is just, for whatever reason, they don't want you to see that he's involved on the surface. But his Pronomos Capital seems to be involved anyway. So you may even argue it goes above Thiel. It's possible, but it's the agenda we're talking about. Now, back to 2025, September. Seasteading, remember the original point, we tried to go out in the ocean to build these, is making a comeback. But those utopian paradises on the high seas have a history of failure. It says they promised utopian paradise, unshackled by governments and buoyed by tech. What they built instead was a costly illusion. We're thinking about, and it's going back again. 2025, April, Christian Theo bros are building a tech utopia in Appalachia. What's the common thread, you ask? You already know. These are all connected to Peter Thiel, Pronomos Capital, and the same agenda, guys. And this was just a comment I liked that somebody posted underneath Jason's clip. The mainstream is a dangerous cult says these are basically privateer fiefdoms, the modern-day pirates of the Caribbean. Friedman is the founder of the Seasteading Institute, which failed to realize its floating city project, the offshore of Tahiti. French Polynesia, similar to Ghislaine Maxwell's Terra Mar project. You'll even find a backward connection to the Epstein overlap. Telling you guys. Now, here is a alarming website. ns.com. These are all network states, and it says of the internet, but it says the network state dashboard is an open source database of startup societies. Now, not all of them are necessarily already in land, but tracking 117 communities globally. Now, many of the ones we just discussed are either on islands that they made in the middle of the ocean or built, seizing land illegally or whatever else. Just take a look, guys. All of these. UK, Global, Lithuania, a lot of them are in the United States, mind you. World Community Network, Zeta House, all the, and that means, like we just discussed, that they're starting to work their way in to change the relationship. Now, look, like I would make a point about constitutional stuff. If these are people, whether collected an agenda or not, who are in the state, county, whatever, and are going through the normal processes, which, by the way, I don't believe actually translate, but that's a different conversation, and are influencing the outcome of policy, let's say, right? And voting for what they want, and that slowly changes. If there's no crime being committed, well, then that's not something I would go illegal. I would point out how I don't like it. Now we should recognize what it's actually leading towards, but it's important to see the difference there, because what I'm seeing is not that. This is not some gentle transition through, political action. This is a forced transition through surreptitious means with all sorts of dangerous actors around the world under the guise of the positive outcome. It is shocking and very clear to me. Now, we will be talking about this. I hope it stops, but I don't think it will. Now, to overlap this with one location that seems to be, whether connected to this larger thing or not, it's the change that we're all that we're seeing. And in Venezuela, I do think there's more to this that connects to this larger point, possibly to just seize a territory of land to make this somewhere else. What they've already done, guys. Iraq, Afghanistan. Well, arguably, the point is Afghanistan was taken. They're not gone if we're going to be real about what's happening, but still in Iraq. Israel owns Syria now, right? That's how do we know that's not going to be the new freedom city? Al Jazeera. Trump says U.S. will stop Venezuelan drug trafficking by land soon. So if he means bombing from the air on land, that's one thing. If we're talking about, which they've been wanting regime change in Venezuela forever, all sides. So this very well could be leading towards exactly that. Maybe even just for the rare earth minerals, lithium, gold, and oil, the rare earth minerals, lithium, and others, and then gold and oil that's also necessary for other things to flood the drive of this new change. But here is an interesting comment. And how long have I been telling you this? Let me grab this and download it, by the way. I think I forgot this. How long have I been telling you this? There's never been a successful, if you look back at all the, let's just even take the major ones. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, right? There's not an example of them regime changing and having it positively change the country. That's just not, and think of how insane it is that we know that, or at least we should, and yet we talk about regime change Venezuela like we would ever allow the kid in the corner that broke every toy to go over there and play with that new toy. That's insane. Why would we let them do that when we know? Because they're lying to us. And the only people that are even involved in that conversation are people that are compromised or don't know any better. So here is a person in Trump's administration, U.S. envoy Tom Barak, saying there's never been a successful regime change. And that's why right now, our team, Trump and Rubio, don't believe in that anymore. Not a joke, by the way, as they just said out loud that we should regime change Venezuela. But apparently for them, that means freedom or whatever, because they say it means different things. Back to the language difference, right? But listen to what he says.
Regime change actually has never worked. So if you take from 1946 forward, anytime that the U.S. has been involved, we've had about 93 coups or regime changes. Everyone has failed. So my bosses, Secretary Rubio and President Trump, are not into regime change.
Oh, sorry, guys. I was muted. I mean, isn't that ridiculous? I mean, it's just on its face, right? Not only are they already doing that and already have Trump's first administration currently bombing Somalia to, more than ever in history, but the idea of openly saying you want to regime change Venezuela. Or, I mean, even talking about Greenland, that's the same conversation. For him to say that is insulting to our intelligence. But what the first part is kind of, it's the same analogy, the same kind of point I've been making, right? He's telling you something we should already know, not because he's trying to be honest, I would argue, but because they know we see it. So what do? They go, yes, and the Fed, yes. And here's your CBDC, right? Yes, it's never worked, but we're not doing it anymore, but they are. It's just to say they know what we want, so they're trying to feign giving you the right thing. It's just, it really is sad to pretend like we don't. I mean, a child can see through what they're doing. I mean, again, you don't say regime change Venezuela and discuss regime change Venezuela and then go on and say, but we're not doing regime change. So speaking of coups, he points out what John Bolton discussed in 2022. John Bolton from Trump's administration. It's interesting. Oh, wait, did I grab the wrong one? Oh, ooh, that's the wrong one. That's weird. Did I not just get that? 1 second. Sometimes this doesn't work properly. Download it for you. Now, it's really just him saying, that he's done coup d'etats, which he's more than anybody, he's always been the one that's kind of like, he likes to gloat about it, even though it's a crime, right? Which even the way CNN responds to it makes that pretty clear, but here he is. It's also the fact that he's admitting that it was Venezuela.
But I agree with you to be fair, with all due respect. One doesn't have to be brilliant to attempt a coup.
I disagree with that. As somebody who has helped plan coup d'etat, not here, but other places, it takes a lot of work, and that's not what he did.
When we were talking about what is capable or what you need to do to be able to plan a coup, and you cited your expertise having planned coups.
I'm not going to get into the specifics, but
think how gross it is to laugh about that. Like, those are crimes, guys. Why? It's okay because you act like you're doing it for good reasons, even though we can hit every time look back and prove that that's not the case. Even right now with what you're discussing. That's just so grotesque to me, the way they view themselves and the world.
Successful coups?
Well, I wrote about Venezuela in the book, and it turned out not to be successful.
Right, so he's wrote a book and bought lots of money discussing his crimes. That's a broken society.
We had all that much to do with it, but I saw what it took for an opposition to try and overturn an illegally elected president.
Oh, right, because that's what happened, right? Not that you were illegally trying to force in somebody who was more amenable to your interests, right? How'd Guaido work out, guys? How'd that come about? A guy who has no standing in any context, despite the despite his position. There was no legal reality for that to take place. There was no election, and they just forced it in for so long. It was embarrassing, and then they just dropped it. They were screaming forever that he's the real guy, he's the president. And then it just stopped, and then eventually started kind of working with Maduro because they're all children. It's ridiculous. But he's just proudly telling you because he thinks he's proud of it. He is proud of it. But Venezuela, the failed attempt they tried that they all lied about. No big deal. So on top of that, and again, remember thinking about this in a larger point, Morgan points out that Venezuela is now claiming that some of these boat clips they're using were CGI. And so she makes an excellent point, and I agree with this. There's no world in which I think that they would be claiming that with what's going on. So the U.S. is trying to come out and essentially going there, the media, Venezuela's accusing the U.S. of using CGI and then using it to sort of say like they're trying to hide the drug trafficking. Guys, it's not what's happening. And that's what's I'll even show you some points here at the end. We'll get to it in regard to drug trafficking. It's just, it's embarrassing, the fentanyl lie and the way they occasionally jump to cocaine to make the point. But that's not even what's happening. Again, if you're gonna make it about cocaine, even though there's now a little rift between Colombia, the U.S. has been an ally with Colombia forever, and that's been the chief export of cocaine through the neighboring country as well. And they know that. They don't do anything about that. But I'm not saying there's not some profiting overlap to Maduro, but there's no real evidence to the idea that he's a narco-terrorist, let alone all the crimes they're committing by killing these people, regardless of whether that was what was happening. It's just crazy. But so them coming out and saying this is interesting. And on top of that, there's more evidence around this. Like experts are looking and going, yeah, this does appear to be some kind of it could be, this is what I was interestingly thinking. They always tone it down, right? They make it black and white. They make it grainy because they don't want you to be able to see. And remember that, I think it was Limpet Mines. It turned out they had a much more HD version that didn't, and ours was gray and splotted because they wanted, there was an operation. That was Bolton. In this case, I think it's clear they want to keep it, without you noticing any details, but that it could make it seem as if it's CGI. This is one possible alternative, or not, or this isn't true at all. But I think what this might mean, if it is that there's a large operation going on. And that's what I kind of felt from this. And it's more than just foreign policy. And, that this is creating something that's coming next. To the point to where that this is like wag the dog style technocracy version. That's alarming. And this is like deep fake stuff. So we'll wait and see how this plays out. This is, I want to go, I'm going to go into this I'm going to be interviewing 7 C's again pretty soon. We're going to go into some of the tech stuff as well. And I'm going to talk more about the tech overlap. Today, I just wanted to make sure our main focus is the overlap of the startup city point. David Schuster points out, breaking, the U.S. Navy, after the CGI point, by the way, has just deleted a video of an October 17th boat strike. Now, to me, after what just came out, that's okay. Maybe there's more to that than we think. And that video was the most easily, I don't know. And then to get it out of there so nobody can see, that's what whatever the reason is, that's what that suggests, that they don't want someone to find something in that. And it says, in this attack, 2 men were rescued and detained on a USS Iwo Jima. Navy was ordered to delete the photos. Now, another point. Now, I made this point about the weirdness of seizing that one boat and taking the people with them when they bombed all the rest before that, and they went back to bombing them afterward. I'm like, what's the anomaly? I thought it was because they were actually aware of drugs and knew they could make a point about it. But maybe there was some kind of a disconnect, and now they just don't want you to know that they did that. Now we bombed all of them. Shut up. I don't know. There's something weird to this. He also adds, the story proves the U.S. military is engaged in a cover-up and destruction of documents, materials related to these boat attacks, which, by the way, is obvious. In fact, this person makes it very clear by citing the U.S. Navy Records Management Program. There's no legal reality where they should have been able to do this without some kind of authority. And what I find, so what he says here is true. And this is the typical partisan ridiculousness of people like this. Liberals finding their facts, which is a funny meme. But the idea that that's your response to something that you should be like, what? I support Trump, but that's a big deal. I care. I have principles. I have honor, integrity, right? No, you're a liberal, dummy, and I don't care what you say. Shut up. Like, that's the kind of comment I just got from somebody when I was pointing out the gun rights thing from Trump. They said, shut up, shut your mouth or something. Like, yeah, shut up, stop telling me the truth. You're bad. People are willfully ignorant today. Last few points here. Jason Bassler highlights the overlap, really showing us, I think, that we should know today just this reason. It's not about drugs. So again, the larger question, then what is it really about? But Jason says, one decade, the U.S. government is guarding Afghan poppy fields and fueling the world's opioid crisis in history, the worst opioid crisis. The next, they're vaporizing fishermen and insisting it's for your safety. Can't make this up. Same empire, new gaslighting. Now, I'll also point out that I wrote an article in 2016 called Operation Enduring Freedom, the United States Opium Trade, which goes over this exact conversation in regard to, back then and what they were doing in Afghanistan. And it's a good article. I went over it again today and make sure there's no typos and everything, because I was a long time ago. And the point was that this is something that very clearly shows you what their real agenda was. And if you read through it, how obvious it correlates with the spike of the opioid crisis and then 90% of those opioids being used within the United States. And you can call that a new opium war waged against America. I mean, it led us to a very clear place, guys. This is all, I think, part of something, not like it possibly could be some long-term plan, but that we're watching people manipulate this country through our government because we're not being represented. Jason also points out both the U.S. Department of State and the DEA confirmed that, quote, Venezuela plays no role in the production of trafficking or fentanyl in the United States. Yep, easily proven, by the way. 46 people extrajudicially, I can't even say that, judicially killed. 0 trials. For some reason, on a funny note, I was like, specifically, no, it's not one of them. Particularly, I can't say that without doing it slow for some reason. It's like my tongue gets too big when I say it. So same thing, judicially. It's just weird. I don't know why. But so it's the point is that Rand Paul, let's call this out. And yet you still see them say it on Fox News. Fentanyl from Venezuela, because we're in a very dangerous time where some of the most ignorant and blind people are at the most influential positions. And it says there is no fentanyl made in Venezuela. Not just a little bit, none. That's Rand Paul. Also, let's not forget, this is 2024. What did Maduro say for Venezuela? Everything is linked. We must defend Venezuela from falling into the hands of Zionism. Now, of course, you could argue he's saying that to tap into something that you think is racist. Sure, possible. Even though it's not, and that's obvious, but it's clear to me that he sees what I think is happening too. That doesn't make him a good guy. That's not the point. You can decide that for yourself. It shows you that he recognizes a larger globalist, Zionist, maybe technocratic, but at least globalist and Zionist agenda that's coming for Venezuela. Pretty easy to see. Now, I'm going to include the show I just did it was entitled Smartphones Worldwide, Silently Infected with Israeli Spyware. Think about that in the context of everything else we're talking about. It was a very big deal. Very little coverage, of course, with phones blowing up in Gaza, right? With the pager attack, with the idea of the ex-Mossad agent telling you recently that they have this kind of tech in every country in the world. You got the clip from 60 Minutes telling you where we affect supply chains with shell companies to our benefit. The idea of this overlapping with the transition of what they're trying to accomplish, or really just trying to suppress criticism, it should be so concerning. And I believe they're tied in with the larger agenda, and that's really why I think this is important. Last few points, where this religious Zionist, also known as Hegseth, who's guiding all of this, is trying to tell you that we should be going back to the war state while claiming he's the peace president, right? Hegseth calls on Americans to give their sons and daughters. You ready for that?
As a result, the War Department will not be distracted by democracy-building interventionism, wars, regime change, climate change, woke moralizing, and feckless nation-building. We will instead put our nation's practical, concrete interests first. We will deter war. We will advance our interests. We will defend our people. Peace is our goal. And in service of that objective, we will always be ready to fight and win decisively if called upon.
Now, did you miss the weird little overlap he did in the beginning? It's It's sort of well done. Listen to this.
Feckless nation building. Interventionism, undefined.
I know, don't forget the Pentagon girl who just came out saying, like when asked a very point blank question about important things, said, we're not nation building. We're not regime changing. We're very America first. And we do the right things and we're good and good. Just like blatant, just plaid, like meaningless statements about, don't worry, we're not all the things you all see that we're doing, basically. So clearly this is where this comes from.
Will not be distracted by democracy building, interventionism.
But they're doing both. It was never about democracy.
Undefined wars, regime change.
Both happening.
Climate change, woke, moralizing.
Oh, whoa. Okay, wait. Regime change, climate change, woke. Oh, okay. Now I get it, Hegseth. Regime change and war was all the lefties. Why not? Why not just dump it all on the side? That's working for some of those morons. Just go, it's all the Democrats. War's always been the Democrats. Who cares about Bush? It's all them. Woke, regime change. It's always been that. I mean, I tend to say they think we're this stupid. He is this stupid. These people are continuing to show you that they do not know how to manipulate like the other, which is a good thing when you think about it. As I've said, Trump really does take that mask off. Apparently, he surrounded himself with a gaggle of idiots that cannot convince you that what they're doing is the right thing, which is good for all of us when we know they're doing the wrong thing. But think about what he just said. How is that? How is climate change? By the way, I can still show you there's USAID funding going to the very things that through Trump's administration in parts of the world where it still works for them. It's always been a means to an end. Right now, he wants you to think that regime change and nation building, which they're currently doing, is only those woke lefties. Just they're not here anymore. And because I said so, apparently that must be true.
And feckless nation building.
Not nation building, not feckless. We're powerful nation builders, right? We just don't do the lefty way.
We will instead put our nation's practical, concrete interests first.
Oh, okay. Is that what it is? Is Israel's genocide America first? Is anything you're doing America first? I mean, we've gone through I'm not going to rattle it all off now. We've gone through it. From day one to now, promises kept. Remember that fun little mantra that used to be forced in? Really not happening anymore. And there's a reason for that.
We will deter war. We will advance our interests. We will defend our people.
Not you, probably, but there's other people we're talking about there. His Zionist people, probably.
Peace is our goal. And in service of that objective, we will always be ready to fight and win decisively if called upon.
Right. So not when you're attacked, right? Just called upon. We'll fight and win, but not war. Different. It's always defense when we're doing it. Sad. Bethlehem doctrine. Or is it? Yeah, that's right.
As part of this mission, we are asking American taxpayers to fund the world's greatest military.
Get ready, guys. Peace, President. No wars, but guess what? We need money for war.
We're asking mothers and fathers across America to trust us with their most precious resource, their sons and daughters.
Oh, okay. Your resources. Because your resources to them. I'm telling you guys, this is a person who's trying to LARP as what we've seen in the past and does not realize that what he just said is really bad. So first of all, the fact that he's doing this in the first place is pretty insane with where we are, with what people want. It's just there's the Department of War. I think he's getting caught up in his own little inner circle of echo chamber of people around him who want this direction, who convince him this is what everybody supports, and you give him limited views. It's the same thing with Trump. When people give him, here's the only two choices, Mr. Trump. You're so smart, pick the right one. When both of them lead you in the direction that people around him want, and he walks away thinking he knows. Oh, they showed me that graph. Woo, that's crazy. And then there's 75 other choices that would have helped the American people, but those two help Israel, so you pick. But as Chris Rossani points out, kids are not resources to parents. Be careful, parents. The empire sees your kids as a resource. Always have, guys. And they're pretty damn clear about that, but they're just usually more tactful than to clumsily say it out loud. And I'll leave you with this clip again, because this guy's, it's just so obvious. And this guy in the military, this is Joint Chiefs of General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He very clearly, in my opinion, seems to feel like, and I can't, it's my opinion. I want to really stress that. The way he says this comes across to me as this is a bad thing, but it's not very, very clear. I could be misreading it, but you tell me what you think. He's simply telling you that we're going to be deploying military in America. Like a lot of us have been telling you, and guess what? That's already happened, despite the Republican screaming narrative telling you it's not. So when he says this, I think he's going, well, I have to follow orders. So it's probably going to happen. But either way, whether he's happy about it or not, this is changing. Where we're going right now, with whether it's the network state direction, Zionism, global, all of these things happening are to an agenda, not America first. I think that's important to state because of how many people that is a kind of linchpin for what side they're on, what they choose. There's so much more happening. But if it takes starting there and recognizing that what they're doing in no way, shape, or form is actually benefiting this country or Americans, and in fact, benefiting plenty of other groups, just not this, they're technocrats, Zionists, then we need, if you can see it, it's time to stand up and start doing something about it. Not violence. Do something about it. Call it out, speak about it, tell your friends. There's so many people out there that you might not realize are willing to hear this. If you just do, show them the information. You'll find more people are aware than you think and actually might misunderstand and think they're the minority in the conversation, and they don't want to say it because they'll be called out. Because the screaming, team sport types who act like everyone's on their side will yell at you the moment you challenge the line, despite acting like it's all about free thinking and liberty. It's contradictory at its core. So hopefully this will reach some people, guys, and we can discuss this. Continue. I'm going to go forward discussing this because, I think that just like I talked about in the very beginning, the fact that it's even being discussed, we can influence the direction by continuing to speak about it. Now, that doesn't always mean we can stop what's happening. We can, right? But sometimes, I guess, just not enough effort, it fails. But it does not mean we should not continue to speak about it, try, call it out, because I saw that during COVID-19. I saw that during numerous agenda sents. We are affecting the outcome. And if it's even a small difference in how that goes, it's worth fighting. To me, it's worth fighting anyway. I believe in these things. I believe in you. So I don't want to live in a startup charter network city run by technocrats and Zionists who pretend to care, but then, pull out the rug the second that it interests them. I don't want that. I don't know why anybody would. And frankly, I don't think anybody does. It's only the people at the top who will benefit themselves at your expense, like always. And that's not everyone in the world or always how it has to be, but it is the reality of where we are. That's not black-pilled. It's just acknowledging the reality while seeking solutions to make it better. It's the opposite, in fact. So thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you all. If you believe in this work, if you find value in it, let us know what it's worth to you. We put this out every day or every show for free because we believe in it. Right? It's important that you have the access to the source material and everything we do. So if it's worth something to you, please let us know so we can continue fighting for you. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
We have not, if you look back over the arc of our deployment history over the last few years, we haven't had a lot of American combat power in our own neighborhood. I think I suspect that's probably going to change. We'll see what we're ordered to do, and of course we follow that guidance, but we're definitely spending some time there now.